Willkommen allerseits. Mein Name ist Andrea Paglia. Ich bin Campus-Managerin hier am CESMA Zürich. Es freut mich sehr, dass Sie heute hier sind und sich die Zeit nehmen, unsere Schule und unsere Arbeit kennenzulernen. CESMA ist ein Ausbildungszentrum im Bereich Audio, Musik, Video und audiovisuelle Technologien. Wir verbinden technische Ausbildung mit künstlerischer Praxis und arbeiten eng mit Fachleuten aus der Branche zusammen. Unser Ziel ist es, den Studierenden eine praxisnahe, moderne und qualitativ hochwertige Ausbildung zu bieten. Der Campus hier in Zürich ist neu, startet gerade, aber wir haben eine Filiale in Lugano, die schon seit 13 Jahren besteht. Der heutige Tag ist als Workshop und Begegnungsmoment gedacht. Sie werden die Möglichkeit haben, unsere Räume kennenzulernen, Einblicke in unsere Ausbildungsprogramme zu bekommen und mit Dozierenden und Gästen in Gespräch zu kommen. Im Laufe des Nachmittags werden verschiedene Fachleute Beiträge halten, ihre Erfahrungen teilen und Ihnen zeigen, wie der Unterricht und die Projekte bei uns konkret ablaufen. Ich wünsche Ihnen einen spannenden, inspirierenden Nachmittag bei uns am CESMA und vor allem viele interessante Gespräche und Eindrücke. Vielen Dank, dass Sie hier sind. Und nun gebe ich das Wort unserem Schuldirektor, Herr Alberto Pinto, weiter.
Andrea. Thank you for coming today. So, as you can see, it's very under construction, this new place for CESMA. Where our tradition have been in Lugano, and even before there was another school in Rome. So, we are in the business since a lot of time, so this is a new start. Basically, as many of you maybe already know, but not everybody. So our goal is to make research, make education in the fields of audio engineering, video engineering, music production, and more recently in the system integration. So we prepare basically for federal exams in these fields. So we have many programs, starting from very basic program up to the federal programs. We are working as well these days for this new exam in system integrator technician, but something that is not really coming. But so this is our aim, basically, to start this new experience here in Zurich. Also, the place is a little bit strategic because we are very close to Nazareth, the television, from where many teachers will come, and also we have CH Media, which is nearby, and so yeah, But I don't want to say we have a bias on broadcast, but of course there will be something, because for instance, up to now at least, there is no audiovisual technician program in Zurich, so this will be the first one in the German-speaking part of Switzerland. And this is one thing. The other thing is that we would like, it's our aim, I don't know if we succeed in, but Our aim is also to make some events in order to gather together people interested in this kind of fields, no? In music, in audio, video. Maybe this is something that is not really ready there. So this meeting is, we called it CESMA Focus. That's the aim, to focus a little bit on these fields. Another thing would be to have maybe more frequent meetings, possibly once a month, on not so broad, maybe more specific topics. But so stay tuned, and you will see what will happen. So I think I can stop and let somebody start. For instance, Eddy. So Eddy Brixen, maybe you already know him. He's a very famous acoustician. Works also with PA. Whatever. Friend, and and we'll tell something about how many stems does it take to make my room sound right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Eddy. Thank you.
I'm one of the guys teaching here now and then, and normally my topic would be microphones at the school, but Alberto asked me to talk a little about acoustics, and I gave him some titles to choose from, and he chose this one. And here are some stamps. I should say, in my daily life, I'm wearing this one. It says DPA because one day a week I'm with DPA microphones. Else I have a company, EBB Consult, where I work with acoustics, for instance, and then I'm also affiliated with the Danish National School of Performing Art and the University in Copenhagen, and doing a lot of teaching in Denmark and abroad. So, but acoustics is something I like to talk about and work with. And now we talk about stamps. These are postal stamps, and that's of course a joke, you could say, because I don't think anybody would start and put their complete stamp collection on the walls to improve the acoustics. I think that would be a failure, one of the bigger ones. This is rather the thing about getting stamps of approval for your acoustics. There's a drawing or there's a project and you fulfill all the legal stuff, so all the laws which you may have in your country are actually fulfilled, but that does not automatically give you a room that sounds good. So that's the thing. So you can have a room where it says you should have a reverberation time of a kind, and you have that, but it doesn't sound nice, right? Now I'm working with a music school. They have rooms for piano, they have rooms for guitar, they have rooms for singing, they have rooms for rhythmic music, and none of them sounds like what they should like. But they, according to the law, it's okay. And the company that built the thing say we did what we should do because the rules tells us this is what it should be like and this is what it is like. But that's the same. Of course, we're not going to have rooms like that for listening. This is a scientific room. That's at the Technical University of Denmark, and there's only one space there where you can sit and listen. And of course, that's nice to be in that hot spot, hot seat there. But the thing is, one thing I work a lot with, because I've been working a lot with theater, is how instead of having a hot spot or a sweet spot, then have a sweet area. So you can be all around the place and have a good feeling of what kind of sound you work with. So you have to consider that in your microphone techniques and in your acoustics of the room you work with, depending on it's a control room, or it's a performing space, or whatever it is. Now I'll give you the gold of acoustics first here, and when you've seen that, you can sleep for the next half hour. Yeah, but anyway, reverberation time, appropriate reverberation time. When the sound stops, it dies out in the room. And how long time does it take to die out? That's the reverberation time. We come into that. Then we should have an appropriate sound distribution. In some rooms, we need a good distribution of the sound. If it's a lecture hall, you should be able, at the back row, to hear what is going on. If it is an open plan office, no one should hear what you're doing at your position. So you may have different purposes of your room, and that really describes what also the sound distribution should be like in that room. Then you should have low background noise. That's always important, especially if you want to assess sound, control sound. Then you should be able to hear the sound that you're producing and not being disturbed of other sounds in the background. You should have no echoes. You can have that sometimes between parallel walls. That destroys the perception of the audio. You should have appropriate control of early reflections. That means from a loudspeaker it goes to the first surface. That could be the floor, that could be the glass or anything. How is that controlled compared to your listening position? And then if you're working with sound production, you normally would prefer have some kind of symmetry in the room, so you have a left-right symmetry in the room in one way or another. So these are some points for good acoustics. If you fulfill that, then everything is fine, basically. Now we talk about, do we have any laws, so to speak? We have a number of standards that we follow. The EBU, European Broadcast Union, has described one. The ITU and other organs like that, standardization organizations, have outlined some standards for that. And what does that mean, what you see here? It's not the frequency response of the sound, it's the reverberation time. So basically you find a target value, and that should be between 0.2 and 0.4 seconds. And then when you have found the target, which is depending on the size of the room, you put that in here, and then all the reverberation times should be within this field here. Then it's fairly the same at all frequencies, and that's what we like. And this include, if you're interested in sound, you will know normally in building acoustics, you only work from 125 Hertz and upwards. In acoustics for music and anything like that, you will go further down to 63 Hertz octave band. One thing we have in a room, that's the square frequency. What does that mean? There's a guy called Schröder, he invented this expression. And it means that's the problematic thing. Sound is very difficult to work with because it's not like when you work with light, for instance. We have very, very, very small wavelengths compared to the objects you work with. If you want sound, sometimes you have wavelength of 17 meters at 20 Hertz. Sometimes it's 17 millimeters at 20 kilohertz. And that means every object in a room will affect the sound in one way or another. And it's frequency dependent. So the sound will behave differently depending on the frequency. That's a little problematic. And one of the things we look into is the square frequency, because above the square frequency, everything moves quite freely in the room. But at lower frequencies below that, then we will have something called standing waves. That means you can hear low frequency sound in one position, and you move to another position, and then it's not there. And then you move a third place, and suddenly it's back again. So that's an uneven sound distribution, actually, and that's something we don't want. So that's below the square frequency. And if we take the values we got from the EBU, 0.2 second, and a room that would be at least 50 cubic meters, then the square frequency is 126.5 hertz. If you produce audio, you will know that's actually critical. If any frequency you work with below that frequency, you will have a problem with that, assessing that in a control room. So that's the thing. If the room gets bigger, then you get 63 hertz in this case, and that's okay, that's more acceptable. So small rooms are basically the worst, because they're difficult to control, because they will have this uneven distribution of low frequencies up to a given point. And it comes across all the fundamental frequencies of voices and many instruments and things. So that's the thing always to consider. You can make a mathematical model on how it, what would be the optimal distribution of that. Here's a small thing that could tell what is a standing wave in a room. If you have a loudspeaker, it will send out a sound, 340 meters per second, so it's fairly fast, you could say. And then it hits the opposite wall, and then it comes back. And if the loudspeaker, at that time, when the sound comes back, the wavefront comes back from the reflection, it just gets another push. It starts all over again. It's just like a swing with a child in a swing. If you hit it at the right position, you can really make it go really high. If you just stand like this, it will not happen. But if the frequency just is matching the size of the room, then we can get very high levels of these standing waves. And it looks like as if it is a standing wave. The sound is moving from one side to another, but we'll have a pressure maximum at the walls and a minimum in the middle, because it seems like it's standing, but it's actually moving. Here it goes, and notice that after some time it's kind of mirroring from the side. It's just a plain wave that goes across the room. So even if we only have one loudspeaker, we could have a long line of low frequency lows or highs in the room. And when it dies out, now it doesn't get more sound, then the reverberation, the lack of absorption from the surfaces will allow it to run a number of times after that. That's the reverberation of that room. And the funny thing is that it always will fit into the room. It will find its place in the room. And I have an analogy that could be a little like this. Here we have a ball, and I take a small ball, put it here, and try to bring it to rest, say, okay, stay there. But what happens is, jump, 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 jump. And after a short time, it is placed down in the bottom. And that's nature. You cannot help it. And it's the same thing with a standing wave in a room. Within 5, 8, 10 times going from one side to the other, suddenly it fits into the room. So it happens all the time. So you can think of it as very strange, it happens, but that's actually what happens. I have some reverberation time I would like to play for you. How is that obtained? Actually, it's a gun. It's just, yeah, it is a gun. It's Smith & Wesson .38 Chief Special short barrel blank, but it's not sharp. So, loose powder, 0.2 seconds. It's a small editing space. All right. It really doesn't sound like a shot, but you can hear what the room is doing. So. Then 0.5, that's a lecture room. It has a little more to it. But now comes the shot. Now it really sounds like the thing. And that's actually a workshop for cars. But 2 seconds, that could be for room for chamber music, actually. All the music we have is developed in the rooms that were there. When Bach played in Leipzig his toccatas and all the stuff that went fast, it was because at that time the church, Thomaskirche, was really damped with a lot of carpets and stuff in there. So he could go very fast, and when you take that to Saint-Sulpice, wherever you take that one, it's too much, because then the reverberation just make it drown or almost. Now, here comes the church then. 5 seconds. Now you can hear it takes time to build up, because there's a lot of reflections that has to reach the microphone. And the last one will be a place that had been used a lot. It's rebuilt now, but at the time it was used for rock and roll. So try this one. For rock and roll. Mm. Ten seconds. But we have times even longer than that. This is an old water tower, and I don't use a gun anymore. That was earlier. It's so difficult to get on the plane with it and stuff. So now I use balloons, and that's also cheaper and everything. Okay. And then we can see how we define reverberation time actually, because again, it's something with frequency. Low frequencies in the bass and the treble here, middle frequencies, but in this case, it would have at 20 Hertz, 35 seconds of reverberation time. That's the longest time I have measured where I was able to analyze all the way down to 20 Hertz, because normally that kind of analysis gets a little blurry. But that was possible. And then of course I brought my flugelhorn. Just have to bathe the room, so to speak. If you just want to play whatever music you have, you can fade completely. That's the thing. How do we calculate that? Yeah, it's basically simple. When Sabin invented that around 1910 or something like that, he found it was so simple. You just, the time equals the volume, how many cubic meters do we have, and then divided by the absorption. And what is absorption? Well, if you have a window of 1 square meter and it's open, of course, then the sound falls out and never comes back. Then you have the absorption of 1 square meter Sabin. Of course, he got a unit after his name. But 1 square meter of Sabin, that's basically 1 square meter where the sound leaves and never comes back. Then the absorption coefficient is 1. If it's a concrete surface instead, then the absorption coefficient is 0, because it all comes back. And of course, then we have something in between. So that's easy enough. Just define all the surfaces, and then you have to find what is the area of that surface, and then multiply by the absorption coefficient, so you can see how many square meters of full absorption do we have available in this case. And of course, then you have to do that at all frequencies, because that would be only one frequency. So get some numbers. You have to control when you calculate it. What can we use for it? We use what we call absorbers. Basically, we have three types. We have the membrane absorber, and that could be plasterboard or anything membrane, some mineral wool, and then maybe some air, and then the hard wall or ceiling behind it. That could be concrete, for instance. We have some resonance absorbers. That could be perforated plate, or it could be like the wall we have behind here. And we could have porous absorbers. The porous absorbers is just something like the carpet here, the ones that up above the panel, and what we have in the ceiling here. And that's basically what we all agree on. These are absorbers, but basically we cannot hit the low frequencies if we don't think of membrane absorbers. They are very important to us. So this is the absorption coefficient of a given generic membrane absorber. It's only a part of the frequency range it has because it's like a resonance, just like a drum. When you hit a drum, boom. And the same thing goes with a wall, drive board wall, or gypsum board, or anything, plasterboard, doom, doom, doom. You can hear that. And wherever it has a tone, it will start vibrating and take energy out of the sound that hits that wall. So it's good it says something like that, because that's where it just takes out the energy of the sound. This is a wooden floor. It's not very efficient, as you can see. It says below 0.2 as the absorption coefficient, but you have huge areas when you have wooden floors. And so the amount of absorption gets higher. And then you can have something, as I said, gypsum board, plasterboard, fiberboard, plywood, and so on, you can use for that. So this is a complete basic construction, and I use that a lot for a lot of studios. These plasterboard thing, if you have three of them, 3 layers, they are good for sound insulation. That means the sound shouldn't go from one side to another. But acoustically, for the absorption, it's not good. So I have made many rooms with 3 layers, and then distance and mineral wool, and then 1 layer, because 1 layer of plasterboard or gypsum board is very efficient for absorbing low frequencies. So we both have the insulation, so the sound doesn't move from one side to another, and we have the absorption of the low frequencies. Here are some examples of how that could be used. 1 layer is good for absorption, but poor for isolation. 3 layers are good for insulation, but poor for absorption. Then we have the resonance absorbers. You can do different things with that. You can make it from a wooden lat like this. I've done that a number of times, and then you can have being close to the wall in one end and further away in the other end. And let me demonstrate what it is like. Then I can have a drop of water. My embouchure is okay. And I can tune this panel. Now I'm tuning the panel. So what we have here is basically when we have this holes between, it's just like the top of a bottle. And if you have different amount of depth behind the neck of this construction, then you can have another frequency. So you can tune your panel in one way or another and make it custom built for special purposes. It can also look some kind of nice. And now the porous absorber, that's the one that we all know the best. The basic and generic absorption coefficient looks like this. It means it has no absorption at low frequencies, a lot of absorption at higher frequencies. This is a 25 millimeter bat of some kind of mineral wool, and this is what it looks like. Above the mid-range here, 630 hertz, it says, there's a lot of absorption. But in the low end, and this is only 200 hertz, in audio we want to go further down, then we have no absorption with that. So that means we cannot control a room alone with porous absorbers. We have to do something else. But it helps us that we can use distance, because the deeper it is, the lower frequency it absorbs. So here you can see it's the same material, but it could be directly mounted, as the first curve was, and then you have a 15 centimeter suspension or 30 centimeters. So if you get this depth, suddenly you have something that goes all the way down for the same material. So in this case, it's very much about using the material in the right way. You can have fancy absorbers. Normally I would say, tell people to turn it around, because then it works better. This is the absorption curve, and you can see it's even above 1. It's better than 1, because if you have 1 square meter of that, the surface area actually is much bigger than 1 square meter. But it's only the high frequencies that will see that. The low frequencies, they will see the total depth, and you can see a standard 50 millimeters of metal wool actually works much better in this case. So for 1/10 of the price, you can get more efficiency from other things. The same goes with a canopy, which you see in many studios above the mixing desk. You may have it for lights and stuff, but the high frequencies will see both sides. Low frequencies only see one side of it. Here's a studio I made in Denmark. Okay, I'll just keep standing here. Behind here, you can see this is one layer of gypsum board all the place. And then we have something where we put the porous absorption outside. And then you have the combination of membrane absorber and a porous absorber with distance. And then you have a complete absorption in the whole frequency span you need in a room like that. So it's just combining the two kind of absorbers for that. Sometimes it's about renovation of stuff. This is the Roma in Antwerp. It was built in the 1920s, and it was a cinema originally. It's all concrete and it's painted, and you are not allowed to do anything at all, it seems like. But if you look at this down here, all the way here, with the original colors, that's membrane absorbers that's been put in. So it looks like painted like the concrete. If you see this one, it's trying to disperse the sound, because if we have a shape like this, concave surfaces, then you focus sound. We don't want to focus sound in rooms where it should have a pleasant sound. So we want to have some dispersion, and that's what that part is doing for higher frequencies, and you don't have anything between the floor and the ceiling. And then at the same time, it's a membrane absorber. So it's a low frequency absorber as well in this case. And there you go. Up here, all these are absorbers as well. And if you look at this concrete wall, it's not concrete at all. It's been photographed and put on linen. And this is my hand. I push it in because it's 100 millimeters of mineral wool, actually, that rear wall. So we don't get a slap echo from the rock and roll down in the front. So it can look like, it looks like the original concrete wall, and the way it was painted and how it's changed over years. However, it was fake because it was a porous absorber that was put in there. Again, absorbers put on. So how do we suppress these reflections? There's some rules, and that's very technical, how much it should be damped, so they will not disturb our listening area. That's the other thing. And how do we remove those reflections? Yeah, as we saw at the Roma, we use porous absorbers, but we could also use diffusers. And these up here are all diffusers that will redirect the sound, so you don't have spectacular reflections. So diffusion in audio is always a good thing. We should always have that. And if we have concave and convex surface, concave, then you get focus point, so the sound will focus in given points. And that's not pleasant. We want a dispersion instead. So, or scattering, that's the thing that's important with materials. What are the scattering coefficients? We can work with that. And then we have to look into surfaces that cross from each other. This is a scenery design, and that was a balloon, 100 times. And the actors being in there, they got completely crazy because every word they said, it would have this flutter on top of it. And that's because set designers these days, they use computers, and it's so easy to get anything in right angles and stuff, and parallel surfaces. Yeah, if it just was turned a few degrees, then the problem would not have existed here. So of course you can change the parallelity of the thing. But the thing is, if you do that, for instance, breaking up the surface, you may still have parts of the walls that still are in parallel. I have an example, Studio 3, Danish broadcasting. It's difficult to see, it's a very black room. But in there would be glass doors, and they did everything to say this is not parallel surfaces because it's going like zigzag. And that was right, but you had a complete reflection across in all the walls, so it was almost as bad as if nothing had been done about it. That's another kind of diffuser. That's the way you could like. Again, Schröder, the same man Schröder, he shows up here. He knows about how to make a diffusion one way or another. This is what it looks like in the spreadsheet. So there are different versions of that, and up here we have one, here some others. This is even made from glass, and that's okay as long as we can have this version. This is a control room, Copenhagen, Sweden here, that's it. So I will end up with just showing some rooms and see what's like smaller and bigger rooms. This is Morten Lindberg, some of you may know him, he's a Norwegian engineer. I have been helping him with his studio, and we, for instance, made low-frequency membrane absorbers in the corners. And the good thing about membrane absorbers, you can have porous absorbers on the outside, and they will both work. So that's what we have in the corners here. This is Sonic College, place in Denmark. That's mixing cinema for Dolby Atmos and the like. This is a kind of lecture room. There's more loudspeakers all over the place than anything else. Genoa has a room, and it's not so perfect because it's actually in an oval space, and it actually makes focus points in the room. This is the Aalto University in Finland, and this is more like it, a home studio for immersive recordings with, or mixing at least, with 4 speakers up in the height. Other versions of that, other versions of that, other versions of that. And even in bigger rooms these days, you design for something that works with so-called immersive sound. This is a room that built by a person that has too many money. So that is Ferraris is just down here in the corner, and there's a lot of Mercedes and whatever Porsches. There's around 100 cars in that room there. I'm already before it was finished, it was already too small. So sometimes some are placed in another garage somewhere else and then brought in, so we can show off whatever he has. But he got a 30-channel system. So it can make the cars go around in the building or anything else. So using a Dante sound card for it, you can put whatever in your 30 channels as you want there. Artistic sound, we have also kind of rooms, for instance, for acoustic sound. Originally, the idea was the artist was hidden behind a curtain because that was Pythagoras when he teaches students. And it has come from there, but in real life it looks like this. It's from PXL Music in Belgium. Because the artist is in the middle and the audience had to be all around and is not able to hear the same as what the artist actually can hear. So that's the thing you can think of, how to spread that out and to be able to monitor in other places. This is from San Francisco. Many sound artists love loudspeakers and lots of loudspeakers and try to get them together and make sound in many speakers. It seems like an art of itself. This is perhaps a little better. Radios playing cricket sounds all over the place. This is also a well-known one. And basically that's a little like the principle of Morten Lindberg when he's doing his recording, because it's a simple thing, one microphone for one loudspeaker, you could say. And then you have no coloration, no nothing. You know exactly where they are. And back in the 50s at the theaters, if you need amplification for the stages, you would have a number of microphones across the stage in the front, and for each microphone there would be a loudspeaker, so you could amplify that. It was forgotten for a number of years because we needed a lot of arrays and I don't know what, but still, when we go down to the basic thing, it actually sounds very nice. This is another room. You can see down here, these are the two buildings. It's a shipyard, and that was for the Eurovision Song Contest in 2014. And the reverberation time was 13.2 seconds for pop music. I think it's too long. So these are tubes, low frequency absorbers that was put in there, and then it ended to be a TV studio with around 2 seconds of reverberation time, and then 10,000 people in there as an audience. Then it worked. And they had a party. If it had been 13 seconds, there would not have been a party. That would, whatever the cameras would catch would be people standing like this. And then there's not a party going on. And one of the last here is a place, a gas chamber, you could say, for made for keeping the gas for supply in the homes. And it was been used for now as a theater, and has been renovated, and all this is concrete, was made around also in 1920 and something like that in Copenhagen. And it had a very long reverberation time. One thing you're not allowed to put anything in the walls, but you can suspend it from the galleries. And if you look at this, these are actually 2 layers of absorbers, as you can see over here. In the back, there is a double membrane absorber that is suspended, so nothing is fixed to the wall. And in front of that, there's a porous absorber, and then you have a broadband absorption from that. Another thing, sometimes you have to redesign stuff. This is a nice hall, you could say a room at a school, but it's a completely plain wall. And I changed it, as you can see here, and especially in the model here. So 3/4 would reflect into the ceiling because it had all the absorption that's needed. But the sound would go between the 2 ends of the room and never see the absorption when it had this flat surface. And what you can see here, this is only 1 layer of deep support, and that would actually only absorb in this end here. But all this absorption came in and reduced the reverberation time because suddenly the sound could see the absorption by giving it solution. And when at the end of the day, this is what most studios look like. So, thanks for listening. First, everything should be fine. So do you say 5 minutes and some questions? If there are any questions or yeah.
Yeah, the membrane absorber, the hang one in last.
Sorry, I must say I have got a cold and my ears are blocked after the flight yesterday. My hearing hasn't come back, so I need to be close.
In the gas cup, you had a membrane absorber.
Yeah.
And I say one side is plywood And the
No,
backside?
it was steel, 1 millimeter of steel
1 minute, yeah.
on each side of a frame
Okay.
with mineral wool
So
inside.
you don't have a moving side and a fixed
No,
side. You
both
have
sides were
two
moving.
moving
Yeah.
sides.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Interesting.
I think it would be too difficult to calculate because the thing is the maximum pressure in the room is closest to the wall.
Yeah.
So the only way to get the highest efficiency would be that. The thing is, if you add two sides on the same frame, the resonance goes up, and you have to calculate that. But I got some prototypes made, and I measured with an accelerometer to see where the resonances were on them to check it. Because
What would happen if you had one side double thickness of the other side?
no,
Doesn't
no,
work.
because I tried because the efficiency goes down.
Okay.
If you make, but I had the different frame width, so I had three different sizes of frames.
Okay.
But in all
For
cases,
different
that would be
frequencies.
1 millimeter of iron,
Yeah.
and then 3 different width of the frame for it.
All right. Thank you.
So that was my compromise to make it the most efficient.
All right.
And yeah, we'll see. No, I didn't have the curve here, but it actually reduced the reverberation time heavily because it was going like this at low frequencies.
Yeah.
And now suddenly it came down to something reasonable with that area filled up. And actually there are also other, as you can see here, there's some porous absorption coming up. When the performance starts, the audience is in space, nobody remarks it, but then it closes because they want people to see the nice ceiling, but then it becomes dark in the room and nobody sees the ceiling, and then we can put some absorption in there. So, yeah, that's the way it can be done.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, so looking at your work, it's fascinating, but how much of it is like almost work of art? You know, every job is different. You have to just go by feeling and intuition, or are there guidelines that, because it seems that every solution is different.
Basically, you could say that the interesting thing about working with acoustic is it's some hard physics, but it's also work of art, basically.
Right.
Because you have to find solution that artistically will fit into the space and not destroy it, and thus just put whatever you think that will work with the acoustics, but you have to think of anything else in the room.
And if you work at the design phase when the building is not yet, then I guess you have a more standard or more industrialized approach to.
Yeah. Strangely enough, it's very seldom I work with something from scratch. It's more
Regrets.
the second opinion.
Yeah.
I have done that. I did a big sports hall, Jyske Bankboksen. It's for 15,000 people or something like that. And compared to other places, they have no complaints about the audio at any time. But that's basically also because I gave them some instruction of how to use it. For instance, some halls are used so you can put the band in every corner, and sometimes you'll have a stage at one end, sometimes in the other end, and other times in the middle or something like that. And it's difficult to make a place that will work for all these situations. So I just said, you play there, okay, and whenever there's music there, you make certain that all unused chairs are covered, and the same goes for any glass windows in the back and stuff like that. And the first concert was Lady Gaga, and I was in the hall, and they played some playback music before the act went on stage, and then you could hear the echo because there's this long distance of the back of the seats, because it's a plastic seat, so it reflects. But when it was about 1/3 full, then the reflections were gone. There were people on all places, and suddenly, then we only had the sound from the front. And that was a pleasure. But you also learn, because I also started, okay guys, we're going to have a wooden floor here, and then they said, okay, we'll have 6 18-wheelers coming in here with a production and driving around on the floor. How do you think your wooden floor will look after that? Okay, we'll take the concrete floor then. And then I tried to put the membranes other places. So I have to learn every time, and that's the way it is. So you have to listen to each other to get the final thing. Yeah. As with everything else. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Who's next?
Next is
Giacomo.
Yes.
Giacomo.
Maybe 2 minutes to set up.
Yes. Yes.
Maybe you want to.
Yes, just 2 words about Giacomo. So Giacomo is an audio engineer working mainly, but not only, with classical music. He's the engineer of the Accademia of Santa Cecilia in Rome, the orchestra. Here we would say Tonmeister. And basically he's gonna say something about a project, big project. You had, I think, together, no?
Yes.
It was in a big church in Rome. With the Verdi's Requiem.
Yes. And
Exactly. And
blessed to do it together in
yes.
a different role.
It's nice collaboration. So yeah.
Yeah, sometimes CESMA people actually work together on jobs,
Yes.
which is very special.
For different
It's not always
reasons,
like that,
but yeah. It was a CESMA, but it happened. Yeah. So. Would be very interesting to hear. You need maybe some help with the.
I need to check if the actual audio comes out. But Give me. Okay. Thank you. I'm Giacomo de Caterini. I'm a sound engineer, as Alberto has explained, and a producer. And I would like to, in a way, approach the acoustics issue from a practical point of view. And we were blessed, me and Simone, to have been charged of following a slightly big production. Sorry for what's been already in the other presentation, but hopefully this still has something else and something to listen to and watch as, by the way. So we were charged from Accademia di Santa Cecilia, who is my main employer, even though I also do lots of freelance work, to produce the audio for a big broadcast, which was to do broadcast over the internet via mainly in Deutsche Grammophon big broadcasting streaming system, which is a Stage Plus. And this was the orchestra and choir for the Accademia Nazionale di Santa Cecilia in a very big venue, which is Basilica di San Paolo fuori le mura, which is actually one of the biggest church in the world, second to San Pietro, I think, but it's still very, very big. I don't know why. And this was the pitch. So this was what we were asked, capturing the spiritual essence of a very, very big basilica and the legacy of the orchestra and choir of Santa Cecilia, hopefully with top technical accuracy for modern audience worldwide. The boosting is all Dutch gramophone, not mine, but I'd like to report that as such. The solution, of course, was to think a lot about strategic microphone placement and hopefully some expertise in live mixing. And the challenge was also to do broadcast both in stereo and in Atmos at 96. So technically it was not that easy, but thankfully a post-production moment was allowed and where we could fix and match and mix better and hopefully do something better with the very challenging Atmos mix. Because one thing, as some people who does often Atmos mixing, is something is to do it live on the spot while you are doing also a decently enough stereo mix, and one is to actually set up for a standing broadcast over the internet, which is worldwide. So one hopefully has the chance to work into some onto some aspect which we will cover later. And I don't know how pristine that came out, but the pitch was to present a pristine recording of in both intimate stereo, immersive Atmos, preserved performances mainly for Deutsche Grammophon. Besides all these pitches, the problem is that everybody was very, very concerned about the acoustics, of course, because as you can see, with those measures, 122 meters length, 65 meter width, and 30 meter height, the volume is more than 200,000 square meters, that means cubic meters, sorry. And then maybe someone can help me on the theoretical reverberation time and call that would come on this condition. And everybody was very, very afraid. Of course, production.
What the reverberation time actually is?
Well, it seemed to be around 12 seconds, but my ears would tell me that it was little more. But it still, I mean, once you are in the after 10 zone, as you can teach us better, it's really challenging for sure. And of course, being this video production, possibly more than pure audio production, my German director was very worried about all this. So they expected a very messy output, and at the same time, they wanted to preserve some presence, because no matter what you do in a record, once you are in a video with close-ups, and I think there were like 9 or 12 cameras, you need to have give some sense of presence to sound, still at the same time giving the sense of big space. So it was quite challenging in those terms. This is also to give you an idea of the how is organized the architecturally the nave, the main nave of the basilica. It's actually very different than a cathedral for absorption characteristics mainly, and cathedral as maybe more marble. This is more a lot of wood worked, ceiling patterns, and the double nave in this way is a double trap in a way. So it's a way where place, and hopefully I can have you listen to some impression of what was like to be there before it comes. There's this constant noise and a little, but mainly because on that shooting they kept the door open, but it's very far from the road, so it's mainly inside noisy and a lot of people chatting, but still very frightening to me. Okay, enough for the noise. This is what it had to look like once started, of course. And you see the large orchestra, the large choir inside, and as a final touch of originality on the rehearsal day, the conductor, Mr. Harding, decided that he wanted the soloist in front of the choir instead of positioning them classically in front of, which led to a nervous breakdown of the director, because they had all the camera patterns and everything set for that, and we had to make do with that. It was fairly easy to me to make do for that mic-wise, but camera-wise was a mess. So this meant that we couldn't use anything of the rehearsal day camera-wise, and so it was very difficult in case too much in post-production with anything wrong that could have happened in the actual concert day, and we get to that as well. But still, this is what happens in real production. And yeah, some notes about the miking. Of course, we needed to, well, I felt to be obliged to do it classically, meaning using a main pair, well, a little more on that, because it wasn't enough to do just to risk it only on one main pair. And also it was considered a big risk to go omni, for obvious reasons. All this reverb, the initial idea is to get rid of, but I kept on doing that, but I set for a B plan on the next slide. I'll show you how. And then of course a lot of ensemble spots for all the sections. This is standard, and we had also multiple ambient mic on the back, but we weren't sure what to do with those because of the sheer length. We had a Sennheiser Ambeo mic, this one, actually this very one, I think, brought actually by Simone, and some other mic mid-wide. I won't go into too much of details unless you later want to ask. But the idea was mainly for sake of having tools and cards to play within the Atmos mixing, to have proportionally far and farthest level of pickup of the ambient. But as you have heard, possibly I wouldn't need too much far, because with this length that would have meant delay and not only reverb. So it was very tricky, but I got more than what I needed anyway, just to be on a safe side. And of course we had to think carefully about aligning stuff, but this is quite clear. And sorry. this is some picture on what you can spot some elements of the miking, and as you can see, I got a double main, and I'll show you later. And section choir miking, of course, was important. So I let myself free.
How many channels did you have?
In total, I think I had. Well, I had to stay within MADI limitation, if I'm correct. But I was working in 96, so I think I was at 32, and I had an extra set of MADI, but I knew that all my main needed to be within those 32, which meant radical choices in order to have enough within those main in case I wouldn't be able to use the extra set. But still, you can do something like that even within 32. You have to be careful. What it is sure is it took me a very good part of an afternoon to mic. I mean, the tricky part was to mic, meaning to gauge distances and imaging perspective, and trying to guess before they were actually in what would happen within this ambient. And so it took me a while to guess all that and guess distances between main, flanks, and actual pairs. But this is normal, but it was even trickier in a place like that, but it's normal guessing, I might say. Even some other angle, you can spot the flanks, which the way I work, even in the studio, are very important, and they were very important to maintain phase relationship towards the main, where at the same time giving a larger, not too far pickup of the whole string section. That's what they are there for. And this is this guy. Is actually at the very back of the.
Yes.
Very back of the.
To minimize the direct sound.
Yeah. This was intentionally put there, but to tell you the
130 meters.
Yeah, and to tell you the truth, we weren't too sure what to do live with this guy. He took him a good headache in order to phase a line and actually work it. We came up with something decent, I think, live, and then something else was to actually post-produce it and put it within a proper mix. But we did use it. And this is the actual miking mainly. So I honored the PA, but I put some other things for color, maybe. And what I did, it was to have a double miking with the main, because with this kind of reverberation, the actual color within omnis becomes a huge difference, even if they are omnis and not different patterns. I don't remember what I should go through my session to check how I balanced those, but I did, and I was very worried that not to have some stereo technique which would limit my pickup, so I depended on distance mainly, of course, but I needed to have, because of the producer kept on asking me sense of huge reverberation anyway, so in a way omni was mandatory. That's the thing. A nice discovery, the twice spots. I never used them before. They are supercardioid, if I remember correctly. They are fantastic, and I usually work with white patterns on quartz, but in that setting, with the thing in front, they having so nicely balanced supercardioid directional was made a difference, and I wasn't sure about that, but they were recommended to me, and it was a good recommendation. Okay. Now, of course, I had to, as I told you, do the routing, of course, but also the thinking in order to achieve successfully the two simultaneous goals. Of course, I was after the stereo myself and someone else, the Atmos mixing, and we had some dire moments. So I'll put my colleagues' broken face during one of the moments, because we weren't at first able to actually really give the same character to things. It took a lot of effort to really have something that looks similar but be enveloping or simply stereo.
How much rehearsal time did you have for it?
An entire day, but only 3 hours, because they wouldn't play for more than 3 hours.
Yeah.
And very nervously, may I say, he was, Mr. Harding was like feverish. He wouldn't just tell me 2 things and then would just rush. And so I had to actually follow. I could ask for 3 times for a little section, and then I had to work with what he gave me, which was a normal musical rehearsal, which is okay, because it's not like in pop where you ask for the drum and the bass, but still I would have loved a little more. And I couldn't work. We tried to do recording, of course, a multi-track recording, and rehearse that recording in order to rehearse the mixing between the rehearsal day and the actual concert day. But it doesn't work like that, because you're missing the actual orchestra over there. So it works to a point. And also, of course, they play differently. The dynamics are rather different. So I knew that, I couldn't trust that. I did rehearse, it wasn't too helpful, but I did it anyway, but that wasn't the thing that helped me at last too much. Of course, just remarks on what I used, and my goal and necessity was to have a live broadcast to Arte in a different format, because they wouldn't accept a high density program. So it was a 48K and full 96 for the Deutsche Grammophon website, and they insisted on a 96 Dolby Atmos, which was still very new, and so we had to consult a lot in order to be able to at least deliver something. And now it's maybe a little more established, but still, to me, the Atmos is really meant for 48 within platform, within DWA. So it's still something on the edge, and we learned the hard way while post-producing. But still, it can be done. Of course, we had redundancy, and we didn't have the luxury to actually broadcast for testing. We just went live on the day of the concert, and no other rehearsal. So it was quite scary, but interesting nevertheless. Now, some of these things that belong to the mixing process are quite obvious, but they got a special meaning within this concept. Balance refinement across all section is rather obvious, but spatial imaging and sound stage definition in a context like that, it has to be approached as a goal slightly differently, because one thing is to be there and wanted to recreate a lifelike the sheer power of this ensemble, and one thing is actually to be able to pack it in a broadcastable format, and it's not radio. I know there are loudness practices, but maybe not yet rules for internet broadcast of this kind of music. So also dynamic-wise, the mixing had a very open approach, and I think I was helped by my experience on radio broadcasting, because there you actually move a lot your main fader and create loudness the whole traditional way, and your loudness metering still means something, but you can stick to that like you would on a normal TV broadcast or something like that. Maybe it's me, but I found it challenging. That's the dynamic processing of things that are related to reverb. This is something that could come up like a weird assumption, adding reverb to something like that. You're crazy? Maybe, but you still have to refine something within the mix, like the voices, because no matter how big the bloom around them that comes out of the omnis or the like, you still have to match with the single mics. So this is common practice, but I wasn't expecting to use it a lot, but still it was helpful to edit. Okay. The Atmos mix, this is the studio where we mix it after the post-production, but it was the minimal but still sufficient configuration of 714, and we knew that we would be hitting an imaginary wall into restructuring in a way, if you let me, the Basilica Acoustic within the height and the ambient channels, and I'll go on to this in the next slide. But the very challenging point within a production like that is really this one: how much ambient you want to put, even if you are able to, in order to stay musically comprehensible, engaging, and with an enveloping music, but still maintain clarity. All these normally helpful channels can work against that. Of course, there's a very thin threshold that goes from normal ambience to mess in this app. So we learned it also the hard way, how not to cross that balance. And also, as it normal in this kind of production, we encountered some other mix issues, but we had to think about how much the audio mix could be for the video. And for the video, of course, when you have close particulars, close shot of single instrument within this big concept, how much are you allowed to really push a bit this instrument or really refrain from that, because it actually takes a little more than little to make it heard, and then it's possibly too much very soon. That was the simple problem with a complex complex answer. Maybe we didn't answer. At the end of the day, I decided not to give too much emphasis on single, because also the piece is not it is meant really to be a large piece and not with too much thing going on. And the voices are enough already as spots that comes out at the best musical moment in time, which is exactly what the composer has meant in the first place. So all this question where we tried to answer, but the answer was keep it as it is. It's already dynamic enough, also in terms of spot, single, particular. But this might not be the idea of the director. So I was constantly harassed on, please give me a little more, this, please give me a little more of that, like we were in a different kind of production, and it took her a little while to understand what I was after, and that maybe it was better to let it live and not constantly adapt it to video in particular. That was interesting to learn. Perspective, where this is classic Atmos or any mix, but in Atmos, in a situation like that, where do I sit virtually as an audience? I mean, yes, of course, I'm not surrounded, but in a way I am surrounded by sound, because the basilica reports a lot. So we experimented in a way to different virtual positioning, and at the end we decided that we just had to really take care of the color and the amount of reverb on the sides and on the back, but we stayed a lot with the main mix in front, and we used the stereo mix a lot more than we thought we would as the basis, as a keyframe for the Atmos 1. And it made sense to us in perspective-wise, may I say. That's why I say the role of the side, which sometimes are a little neglected. They were kind of a spot, and there was also other question that we asked for in this perspective, and also this is tied to the previous one. What are the rules of engagement within envelopment? What is enveloping? Do I pretend that is I listen to the mix in Atmos way and I'm there, or it is just a cake with all the nice thing on top of a classic stereo recording? It's quite different actually. If you are in a situation like that, usually sometimes you can get away with some reverb around you, maybe fake, maybe something from back mics, but it wouldn't just work like that. We had to think which part of the main miking could get a role on our side and on our back, even though the mix would be on our front. That's what was different than normal thinking. And that's why I say rule of engagement. What do you consider as, again, enveloping after all? And this means that you can cook it very differently. And so we try to, the easy one, so pretend that it's a stereo mix but with a lot of things around, but not exactly pretend that you would be standing there. Maybe you can feel you're there, but actually it's not the way we felt it would work best. Okay, this is just, we looked for a new facility where to work, and these are classic things that you ask for a decent enough mixing environment for Atmos. We had all these things, and at the end of the day, they all meant a lot, and these are not selling points, it's just things you need when you are working with material like that. And this is where this thing went. So, live broadcast, stage, glass catalog, Stereo+Atmos, and archive for academia. So it was really declining in a different scopes and direction. What did we learn? This kind of space required, I mean, your normal techniques might not work as you know them. You have to really stretch them in a way. Live streaming demands real-time mixing excellence. This is, I'm not sure we had this kind of excellence. It was maybe more challenging than what we were able to do, and we are only happy after post-production. So I think we did a decent enough job live, but we managed to have all the right balances within post-production, mainly also because we worked in headphone, and it's very difficult to grab this kind of thing on headphone, no matter how professional you might be. So this was a big limit we encounter on ourselves. Maybe there's some people that are very good at that and can really do this thing on headphone, and it was impossible, of course, to have a proper control room within the church. And the thing we had outside, like trucks, wouldn't work anyway. So I had to be there in a way, so it wasn't doable. The only way was to do it on headphone. And I'll let you hear 2 or 3 and watch 2 or 3 minutes of the actual thing, and it's very, you can hopefully see the dynamic quality of the material. So where we were on different sections. So we start slow and then something else happens. Hopefully. for some questions if you have any.
What would you change in retrospect or add in terms of microphones or monitoring or workflow? Or would you at all?
Well, I'm okay with the miking. I think it served my purpose, and you had idea why and how. I think because you cannot escape this world, but you still, that gives you the sheer idea of power within there, but it's still understandable. So it's all miking choices and distances mainly. It's a little mixing, is more before. So I'm rather okay. Maybe I would have taken also additional B plan and C plan for mains in order to see what would happen. I mean, I did. Then I decided I couldn't put too many. So I had to decide for color, and I decided to go one way. So maybe another time I would give myself stereo technique-wise a B plan with a little less pickup, and I would have prepared much better, but we couldn't. But now I know for the live Atmos mixing, much better, and it's not done to any single people problem. It's just that it's a very complex thing to do that, and you really had to in a proper environment, or you had to reduce your goal while live, which in retrospect is something we would have needed to do, instead of wanting to do a very close mix to the stereo one, and maybe it's too difficult. So this is mainly what to answer you my question. Good. Thank you. Anything else? Thank you. Thanks very much.
How were the reviews? Yeah, how were the reviews? Did you read all the magazines the day after?
The reviews were there weren't many, but they were a couple good, and the most important one for me was the chief, the big boss of the Deutsche Grammophon, which who I've been reported was happy, and also my big producer in Berlin was very happy. So this was to tell you the truth, the thing I cared most about. And then I've read it wasn't too much reviewed, possibly because it's within it's not television, so it get reviewed more. It's just there. Maybe now that more than a year has passed, some people has put something. And the little I read, they were okay. But I'm still curious.
Great. Thank you.
So we warmly welcome Marco Montanari, an old dinosaur. He says about himself, about the European Patent Office. So
yes,
I examiner of mainly video stuff about displays, all this kind of stuff, and of course he is also many other things. A very old friend and an organist, musical organist. So thank you so much for being here and say something about your nightmares.
my previous life. Okay, thank you. Alberto, thank you very much for inviting me. I will speak about video this time, not audio anymore. I will not tell you anything that is meant to teach you something. I just want to tell you my experience when I was working in the video field at the beginning of my career, so in the good old times when everything was analog. I chose to speak about development of a monitor based on a CRT, a very special color monitor. Simone told me you can say whatever you like, but talk about displays, because we have already enough people talking about audio, and so okay, I had to speak about displays. In the beginning of my career, when I started, there was no digital electronics at all. Everything was analog. I'm talking about 80 years of last century. So we had to do everything just with analog circuits. And that's what I'm going to tell you today. Maybe not very interesting for audio technicians, maybe not even for present-day video technicians, because this is archaeology in a sense. It's not present-day technology anymore. But I think it's an experience which is worth being told, and so okay, let's start. How many of you is familiar with CRT technology? Maybe you have seen something in the past, maybe those which are not too young anymore. But in fact, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about CRTs is that present-day video systems are terribly boring, in that the nightmares are not anymore for those who want to develop a product based on a video panel. The nightmares are for those who produce the video panels. And once you have a video panel, you have everything. You put a frame around it, and okay, maybe you make some video processing. Everything is digital. You have just to program something. At the time when we developed our CRT monitor, everything was analog, and we had really to build the electronics around the CRT, which you see here. And so that was a challenge. CRTs are surely not so boring as the present-day LCD, OLED, and such things are, especially for a developer of monitor. And our was really a very special monitor in the sense that we wanted to do something which was quite better than the normal TV sets that we had on production, that we had at that time in our homes. At that time, maybe some of you will remember, there were so-called standard definition TV sets. So here we have this resolution. This is on scale. This called SD with 480 lines per frame. This is the American standard, which was then better known as VGA, because it was taken by the computer industry for their monitors. The first monitors were of this resolution with 480 lines per frame height. There were no pixels at the time. So we had to speak about lines, because the only sampling of the picture was vertical. You only had lines. In one line you didn't have pixels, you only had image. And the resolution was based on the video bandwidth of your video amplifier. So the maximum frequency that a video amplifier could reproduce, but there were no pixels. And in the European system, of course, for computers, we used 640 times 480. 480 lines are the number of lines which bear an image in the NTSC system, the American system, which was used by the Americans, which was used also by the Japanese, and therefore they established this standard for computers. But for for TV sets, for normal broadcasting image. We had in Europe the standard with 575, so 576 lines, which was also in the same format, 4:3. That is, let's say, 3 units in the height and 4 units in the width. And this was called in Europe the CCIR standard. For example, PAL in Italy, in Germany, in Switzerland, I guess, as well, and SECAM in France, and so. These were, let's say, 575 lines, which were carrying an image, and well, that was not much, but it was okay for the time, and for our purpose was not at all okay. For a monitor which had to be driven with a computer, especially, because we wanted to be able to reproduce finer details. And that was at that time not possible. And even in that case, we wanted to have a different standard, because if you use an interlaced standard, I'm not going to go too much in details about interlacing and such things. They are rather specialistic things, but in any case, we wanted to have a higher resolution. And so at that time, we decided to build a monitor which had this resolution, slightly less than a full HD, with a CRT, still with a 4:3, so not as wide as a full HD, but still around 1,000 lines. And of course, if you have 1,000 lines, you must have about 1/3 more, so 300 let's say imaginary pixels per line. How to do that? You have to start, when you want to design something, from the most critical point. In our case, the most critical point was the CRT. There was no standard CRT which could do that. Besides the electronics were our business. But first of all, you must have a CRT which can reproduce this picture. So we found the Japanese. The Japanese are very kind people. They said, yes, we can produce something like that. But we have, they always say yes if you ask something. But sometimes this puts them in a very bad position, because then they have to say no. And in that case, they said, yes, we can do it, but we have to stop our production for 1 day, because we have to rearrange our machines so that your special CRT can be produced for you. We are going to spend a lot of money. We want to do a certain number of these CRTs. They are CRTs which are used not only for reproducing pictures, but also for being driven by computers. They must go, they are military things. They must go on ships. They are going to be mounted on submarines. They are going to be mounted on tanks. They must be robust. We want to make, let's say, 30, 40, 50 pieces. They are as big as that. Very heavy, extremely expensive, protected everything against everything, doesn't matter. They can do all that you want. Okay, good. But we have to stop production for 1 day. And we said, well, how many do you normally produce in 1 day? Can anybody guess how many Toshiba could CRTs produced in one day at that time? Give me a number.
5,000.
1,000.
5,000.
40,000. In one day, Toshiba produced 40,000 CRTs. We wanted 30, 40. So we had to make a deal in some way. But in the end, we got our CRT. And at that point, we wanted to start building electronics. And now I have to tell you how our CRT works. This is a picture which we have put in a book that we are writing. We are now presently preparing a textbook for CESMA. So in some weeks, months, I don't know exactly when Simone will agree, we'll be ready with this book and we'll publish it, and then we'll, I think it will be translated into German, is that right? Yeah. And when it will be ready, we'll publish it, and you will see a lot of details concerning CRTs, because I have written that part, and also because some historical background is very important. And sometimes you may happen to see something still working with CRTs. By the way, I have a CRT here, and I will show you after the conferences. This is a section. You can imagine you have your screen here. You take a big knife and you cut it like that. So this is seen from above. Okay, this is the faceplate. This is so-called neck. And these are the contacts which bring out the electrodes. And how does it work? Starting from the neck has a sort of device which produces electrons. The electrons are, let's say, squeezed out from a part which is called gun, electron gun, and which I can show it here. This is a detail, and this is a so-called cathode. This sends electrons out, and these electrons here have voltages, carry voltages, which are so configured that these electrons are bundled in let's say, stream, which is then sucked out at very high energy and speed from this side. This is seen from the side, but there are actually three of these, one close to the other for red, green, and blue. Okay, and these electrodes are used to focus this beam so that it becomes extremely small, and there are three. So this is the idea. What is important to note is that these voltages here, for example, G3, G4, G5, G3 and G5 are the same, and G6, which is the anode voltage, are extremely high. The first nightmare was to find the right CRT. The second nightmare was that every day we worked with these voltages. We didn't know if the day after we would be alive or dead. Guess what the G6, what is the voltage of the G6? It's 30,000 volts, okay? The electric chair is 1,000 volts. This is 30,000, and of course the intensity is very low. You work with few milliamperes. This beam which goes out, it's just a few milliamperes. But milliamperes times kilovolts makes watts. And if you get a watt on your body is already something, especially with this. And then this burns because high voltage makes. I had a technician in my team which went too close to the anode. I will show you what it is.
What's not to like?
Here, all this part of the CRT is biased with 30 kilowatts. All this inside, not outside. This is glass, okay. But inside there is an electrode and all this. And if you go too close to this, a spark comes out, and your hand gets a nice black hole, which takes months to heal. So when you are working here, you better be careful. Okay, and that's the electron gun and the polarization, so to say, the biasing. And then we have this device. This is a so-called yoke. Yoke is made from coils. It has some coils which are used to move this beam. This beam would go straight and hit the faceplate. But if you want to create an image, you have to move it, as you see it here in the figure, from left to right, and then come back, and then again, and at the same time from the top to the bottom. So these are the lines, and then when you are at the end, you go back and you start again. And so a picture is formed. And since this is a color CRT, you have 3 of these things, and they have to be deflected by this yoke and go, and they must hit 3 different points which are here on the faceplate, which are called the phosphor dots. This is the yoke. I will talk about it in a while. And this is how it works. Here, it's not like the other picture that I have shown before. Here, the 3 guns are put in a so-called delta configuration, so not in line. This is another way to build a CRT. And the 3 beams cross in one point of the so-called shadow mask, which is made of steel. And they are so placed that each one of them hits phosphor dots. And our tube had this distance here, which was 0.1 millimeter, 1/10 of a millimeter. Okay, so now you just imagine you have this beam, you deflect it, you have your screen which has a certain curvature, and during the deflection the beams should all in any place of the screen cross at this point such that they correctly illuminate the points, so that all electrons coming out from the G illuminate only the G pixels, dots, and so on for the green and for the blue. You can imagine this. This is another nightmare. Well, what we did was to drive the yoke such that you got this. These are coils, and you have to drive these coils with some waveforms. But the coils have a certain inductance. You know that inductances don't like changing current, which is a real pity, because when you have to to work with these things and you have to have a deflection, you must change the current direction very often in order to provide the horizontal deflection. The vertical is less critical because a frame lasts 1/50th of a second. We had 50 hertz of video frame speed or frequency. But so in fact the coil is driven normally by an audio amplifier, 50 hertz. But the horizontal deflection, if you take the standard, let's say PAL for example, you have in the PAL standard you have 625 lines at 50 hertz. Let's say for reasons of interlacing and so on, the full frames per second are only 25. If you multiply 625 by 25 full frames per second, you get 15,625, which is the number of hertz of your deflection, 15 kilohertz. Okay, which means that deflection had to change the direction of the current 15,000 times per second. Our monitor had to do it 64,000. If you multiply 15,625 times 4, you get 64,000, and that's precisely the frequency of our monitor in order to get 1,000 lines, non-interlaced. Well, that was also a nightmare, because when you try to do that, you find enormous spikes in your deflection, and besides sending disturbances everywhere, there is a problem that the voltage goes very, very high. So high that sometimes in some sets, this deflection is also used to generate the high voltage of the anode, which is also not nice if you think everything must be well isolated. Isolation is very important, just to avoid sparks. Well, that was one other problem. And finally, we have a problem concerning the landing. What I was saying before cannot be achieved by just deflection. So what happens is that in this kind of things, if you move this so, it would land almost perfectly, because then there are other things. If this had the same curvature as the deflection, so if this string, instead of being almost flat, would be really spherical, but it would not be nice. This is more flat, which means when you do this, everything goes out, and in the corners you have a very bad shape of your image, and all these colors go to the hell. You don't have any idea where the beams will land. And therefore, you have to make corrections. In the digital time, what do? You say, okay, I take a memory. I put in one of the cells of the memory one point of the screen, and I store a correction value. Yes, but we didn't have memories, and we didn't have possibility of making digital corrections. Why? Because there were digital circuits at that time, but they were way too slow. We couldn't do any digital video processing. There was no possibility of going at the speed that we wanted to have. I spoke about our number of lines is 1,000 lines, which means on a 4:3 aspect ratio, 1,300 more or less points points which must be translated into frequency of your video amplifier. If you make the calculation, 64 kilohertz deflection means 16 microseconds per line. 16 microseconds per line, you have to do 1,300 points, let's say couples of lines. This makes 100 megahertz. Today you have a video processor which work with gigahertz. Gigahertz, you can do whatever you like. Video RAMs which have access times of nanoseconds, even less. No problem. At that time, our microcontrollers had a clock frequency of 1 megahertz. And we worked with those computers, early days, Windows 3.1, can you imagine? I mean, forget it. We had to make all correction analogically with waveforms, which had to be calibrated in such a way that, for example, if you were here, you could shift all lines up, some lines down, some lines up on the left side, some lines down on the right side, some lines up on the top, some lines bottom on the bottom. Can you imagine how many corrections you need to have a perfect picture in a monitor at that time? So sometimes people say, oh, well, it's so nice now to have these LCDs. They have replaced the CRTs because CRTs are heavy, are bulky, are expensive even, well, more or less, yes. And they consume a lot of power. No, they have replaced CRTs, which were very good technology, because you need these corrections in order to have only on the deflection. I'm not talking about video here, video supplied to the cathodes. I'm talking about correction concerning the position of the beam on the screen. You have here size, linearity, so that your beam doesn't move like this, but it moves perfectly smooth on the line. Pincushion, if you project, let's say, a rectangle onto a spherical surface, you have something like that. You have sort of barrel. So you have to correct your deflection such that it goes more, let's say, to the bottom at the center and more to the top at the corners, or the other way around. It depends on how it is made. This is the so-called pincushion or barrel distortion. Trapezoid, you get a deflection like this or like that. Static convergence, such that your beams cross in the right point, converge at the shadow mask. This is a condition to have the red to the red, the green to the green, the blue to the blue. And then dynamic convergence, what does it mean? This is just to get normal convergence at the center of the screen, and then when the beam moves in another position, you have to add some more corrections which move during your deflection. This is the dynamic conversion. Corners and the purity. Purity means that if you want to project a flat red, it must be red everywhere. Okay. If you want to make a perfect monitor, it takes a number of hours by a technician who is preparing this monitor. I mean, and you must be very trained, because in the beginning, these are all trimmers, little potentiometers that you adjust with a screwdriver. Okay, you must know what each one of these does and corrected. And it's even more than a nightmare, because once you change one, the other one also changes. One influences the other. But never mind, we didn't lose heart, we just produced a perfect, nice monitor and we sold it. And then the client came and said, yes, it works, it's nice. But when you are on a submarine and you go north, our enemies, which are normally in red, become green. And when it turns again, it goes west, the enemies which have become green are again red. We knew that. Why? Can you imagine why?
The magnetic field of the Earth.
Perfect. Yes. On the Earth there is a magnetic field and the deflection is magnetic, and despite the fact that our Earth field is extremely weak in comparison with the magnetic field which is generated by the yoke, this very, very small change of magnetization lets this beam, a tenth of a millimeter is enough, shift from here to here, from here to here. And so a red becomes green. And so this was why this phenomenon is normally not relevant. It's easy, because you put your TV set there and you don't move it. But if you put your monitor on a tank, every time the tank makes a 90 degrees turn, you are lost. So this phenomenon is known, and there is even a device which avoids that. And it's triggered every time you switch your TV set on. And this is a sort of demagnetization, so-called, which is a sort of discharge which is made in such a way that your monitor becomes demagnetized, and that then you have no residual magnetic field. And then it stays there, and it's okay. But we cannot, of course, ask a client to switch on and off the monitor every time the submarine changes its course. We had to analyze this, and in the end, we had to mount a magnetic field sensor in the monitor and a coil around the screen and give a counteracting field. And then this problem was also solved. And then we remained with only one nightmare, that sooner or later our clients could come back and say, listen, we have another problem again. Thanks God this never happened. Thank you very much.
You suddenly reminded me of how difficult it was in those days. When I got my first education, that was with Danish broadcasting in 1969, in another century. And the great fun was, I was also at a service workshop for receivers that was for politicians and important people. They would get a device delivered for watching broadcast. And in between, in a workshop like that, somebody would bring his own television set just to dust it off and just check stuff. And the greatest thing you could do was, during lunchtime, was switch the deflection coil connection, because when you look in a service mirror, you look always at the picture in the mirror, which you see the screen from behind. Mm-hmm. And when you see the picture's okay, and you put everything, put it all together and bring it home, that is mirrored everything on the screen.
Yeah, yeah.
That was the greatest thing about those devices.
Precisely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's a technique because the yokes have to be adjusted from behind,
Yeah.
and therefore you need a mirror.
But the big problem we had would always be with the loudspeakers. When
Yes.
we start making
Yeah.
double surround, and we need a loudspeaker close to the image. It was
Yeah, I must say I only cited just to avoid to make it too long a part of the nightmares we had. In fact, we had to enclose the whole monitor in a screen of new metal, which is a special kind of metal which shields the magnetic fields, exactly to avoid that if you have a loudspeaker close to it.
Speakers.
Yeah, and also another thing we had, which was a very big problem, which gave us nightmare, was that if you have a very high beam, because the characters are very small and you need a very high intensity, then the steel of the shadow mask gets heated, and then the holes are deform, and also it makes a sort of curvature, and then you also have a problem.
Amazing that it worked.
Yeah, but I must say I decided to go to the image sensors, and from that time on, for the following 35 years, I work with image sensors. Yeah.
Question. In the beginning, when you said you wanted to get a better monitor, I didn't understand the limitation of the technology that was available was in terms of the phosphorus size, the beam size. What was the thing that prevented achieving a higher resolution, or
Yes.
just the size of the?
Yes, everything. In fact, if you make a higher speed, then your line. This is the main problem. Your line gets faster, which means, for example, in the PAL system, you have one line which has a length in terms of time, 64 microseconds. Our had 16, 1/4, and this means that your video bandwidth goes high. And the problem with a higher frequency amplifier, you can easily build a 100 megahertz amplifier. Even at that time, there were transistors which could do that, but the voltage swing could be, for example, 1 or 5 volts. But in order to drive the cathode, you need 80 volts. And of course, there is a difference between making a 100 megahertz signal with 1 volt peak to peak and 80 volts peak to peak. I mean, the transistors must change, let's say, the steepness of the voltage.
Sorry, but I meant also in terms of the CRT manufacturing. When you went to the Japanese, you wanted a new CRT with, say, denser phosphorus, more sensitive. What was the technological CRT
Okay,
problem?
from the CRT manufacturing, it was less of a problem. The only real problem was that they had to change shadow mask and phosphor masking.
Okay.
But for them, making small enough was not really big trouble. The problem is CRT manufacturers normally don't make electronics. So for them, they make the CRT, and then it's your business to make the right electronics. So for them, it's okay. They didn't really care too much about that. The problem was that the electronics had to cope with the new CRT, and that was, for example, I was in contact with Thomson CSF at that time in Grenoble. I went there a lot of time because they also produced CRTs, and it was easier than to deal with Japan. But yes, I mean they really didn't have intention to do something like that, and even they didn't have the electronics to test. So in fact, the first times when we tried, We went there with our electronics, and they were very happy to have our electronics to test their tubes. And they asked us to leave our electronics there. We said, okay, yes, but listen, this is expensive. We don't leave it for a long time. The time you need for making your experiments. And we had other business with them. Of course, we also bought other tubes for black and white, for example, such things. Yeah. But this was really the worst. I mean, the most complicated project that we had to follow, especially for power issues. High voltages, high currents. No, that was not nice. Not nice. I mean, not nice. It was a challenge. Thank you.
So maybe let's take a short pause. There is something to eat. Huh? There is something to eat over there, so drink, so we can take it. And then the last two. Okay. Next talk, Simone Corelli, re-recording sound mixer. Wait, it's correct? Okay. And so it's gonna talk about a restoration project, no?
Yes.
So it will be really interesting. And okay, you can introduce what you said.
Thank you. I talk about restoration. I'm going to complete in the next month after 3 years, which is Franco Zeffirelli's Jesus of Nazareth in English, which is the original version, and in Italian also, dubbed in Italian, because the Italian version was obviously probably the most important for an Italian director who worked on the dubbed version, who collaborate for the text, for the translation, etc., and followed the work of the actors, the dubber. Have you ever seen the Jesus of Nazareth by Franco Zeffirelli before? Yes. Who no? So it's a 6 hours worth TV series made in the late 70s, in 77, that enjoyed widespread success throughout the world, especially in the United States. I worked on it as a sound restoration supervisor. Sorry, I read because my English is terrible, so I translated and printed some note. I worked on it as a sound restoration supervisor for the enhanced re-edition that is about to be released commercially. For the image, the supervisor was Daniele Nannuzzi, who was also the director of photography for the original work 50 years before. I want to thank Cult Media and Lorenzo von Lorck for giving me the opportunity to restore such a masterwork. In its complexity, this series provides a golden opportunity to ask ourselves some quite uncomfortable and therefore quite revealing questions about the restoration and re-edition of audiovisual works. As we shall see shortly, the term complexity is perfectly justified here. Let us take a step back, however, and observe first of all that cinema is an art form intended for enjoyment through copies, not unlike literature. Those involved in restoration must then ask themselves a preliminary question: what is the original to be restored? In the case of a book, does the original coincide with a specific historical copy, or with the text and the typographic matrix that enabled its printing, thus allowing a typographer today to produce a brand new reprint and legitimately consider it the restored book in the purest state possible. One can also pose a second question, less technical, more cultural. Should the patina of time in the copy-based works of this type be considered an element to preserve and valorize, or an accident to be removed in the name of greater fidelity to the original? In the case of an audiovisual work, typically a film, the original could be considered the master, the original master, the audiovisual recording of the performance after post-production, after editing. That is the master from which distribution copies were generated. It is a good choice for the original to be restored. Another possibility is to consider the original the first copy of the master ever produced, or the copy used for the first public screening of the work, or the best master that can be reconstructed today, starting from the original materials, repeating the post-production choices made originally, but with the highest quality and targeted to the best reproduction system available today. And in case of multiple versions in various languages and with different cuts, as in the example we discussed today, which version should be restored as a priority? The version used at the first official public viewing, the most famous version, the most recent version curated by the same original authors, the most recent version authorized by the copyright holders, the technically best preserved version, or a combination of all? Many questions and few answers. In Jesus of Nazareth, moreover, we have the direct sound version shot in English, which contains some dubbed parts, but there also exists the version dubbed in Italian, as I previously told you, directly supervised by the director, who was Italian. Those who work in cinema know how binding the conditions are when shooting a film. For example, in terms of available time, always less than necessary. While dubbing, with its decidedly lower costs, we might say almost negligible compared to the total budget, allows directors to concentrate on the performance with greater attention to detail, as well as sometimes allowing them to choose voices without constraints due to the visual appearance or fame of actors. Let us remember also that in the 70s, most Italian films, not only Italian, were indeed shot in Italian in the so-called guide track, and then dubbed, still in Italian. Not always by the same actors who had lent their face. There are quite curious cases where, for example, we have Marcello Mastroianni with the voice of Alberto Sordi in Domenica d'Agosto, or with the voice of Nino Manfredi in two films directed by Luciano Emmer. Parigi è sempre Parigi e Le ragazze di Piazza di Spagna in the 50s. So, which is the original version closest to the Zeffirelli's intention? The direct sound in English or the dubbed one in Italian? For the record, the question was easily solved. We deemed it right to restore both versions, which will be available in the Ultra HD Blu-ray edition, complete with French, Portuguese, Spanish and German languages as well. These, however, in normal sound, not restored as deeply as we are going to describe. Summarizing much of the previous questions, perhaps we could simply ask ourselves whether restoration should fetishistically reconstruct the original experience with its technological limitation of the era, or go beyond and reproduce the master in the best possible way. Or even reconstruct an even better new master. In this regard, we think of the many remasters of famous musical albums, produced by recovering, sometimes by recovering the separate tracks and remixing from scratch, often with the supervision of the artists themselves. The correct term for this practice would be remixing, but often the term remastering is used. Rarely, in these cases, is there concern about the ethical respect for the original. Rather, the focus is on quality, and if it's better, everyone is happy. The old version is not deleted, a problem that pictorial art, sculpture, and architecture would have instead. The debate on film restoration traditionally tends to sharply oppose philological archival restoration to commercial modernization, viewed with suspicion by the archival community. However, recently some scholars have proposed to overcome this dichotomy. For example, Caroline Fournier of the Cinémathèque Suisse suggested at the FIAF Symposium in Lausanne in 2019 that two parallel versions of a work could be produced, an archival version for longer-term preservation and a popular version for the market and contemporary screenings. We introduce now a term that fits well with the choices we have personally made, which we believe are in the interest of the buyers of this new edition. Augmented restoration, that is a restoration not designed for archives and museums, but to make a work from the past live again, in the most effective, pleasant way, as close to the author's intention as possible, exploiting the best technologies of today. Augmented restoration is consciously situated in a third domain, intermediate between those cited by Fournier, with a crucial difference compared to the popular version. It is not about modernizing the work against the original intentions or adapting it to the contemporary tastes, but rather better realizing those intentions with technologies that were not available at the time. The fundamental question becomes, what would the authors have done if they had these means available, rather than what can we do to better sell this product today? Augmented restoration doesn't aim to preserve a single historical incarnation of the work, but to establish a credible relationship between artistic intention, original material, and contemporary viewing condition. Sorry. I'll give you a very simple but clarifying example. If an airplane moves across the screen from left to the right, and the original sound was a two-channel stereo, why not also use today the center channel for the passage to provide a more realistic experience, especially for listeners seated off the central axis? The intention of that panning is very clear. And if we haven't had 5 front speakers, why not to pan across all 5 front loudspeakers? It's obvious that the mix engineer would have done so if they had been available, and if the original is a real airplane passing in front of us, using 5 speakers instead of 2, bring us closer to the ideal original. In Jesus of Nazareth, the mix was always monophonic, because designed for television of that era. But I had the original music reels recovered, which had been recorded in stereo.
Okay.
I have no reasonable doubt that Zeffirelli would have authorized the multi-channel re-edition. Why not to do it? Mono is a way of using something more adherent to the original, which is a real orchestra playing in a large space. The mono should be considered as a limitation of the era, not as a deliberate aesthetic choice. We hope. We hope so. Certainly, augmented restoration is a very young practice that must find its balance, establish rules, develop an ethics. I don't say it's easy, and I perfectly recognize its risks. Summarizing, we could define the practice as a form of critical remixing and remastering that reconstruct a new master from original materials, only original materials, using contemporary tools to overcome historical technical limitation, without introducing content foreign to the work, with declared, reversible and motivated interventions, aimed at enjoyment consistent with plausible authorial intentions, and with the highest possible quality. However, one should consider the possibility that part of the audience from that era is still alive, and therefore prefers an experience similar to that of decades ago, without interest in a valorization of the author's intention with more modern and qualitative means, which is a very understandable request. A very extreme and, in my opinion, deplorable example is to better understand this point of view, is the redubbing of foreign films with different voice actors compared to the initial ones, which is a practice due to contractual reasons, very strange contractual reasons. In Italy, this has given us, for example, in Indiana Jones, the Pino Insegno voice with a very different effect compared to Harrison Ford's dubbing by the great Michele Gammino, his historical dubber. Michele, moreover, is still active and continues to dub Harrison Ford in the series Shrinking for Apple TV. In the Indiana Jones example, it's evident that the mnemonic pact with the original audience is being broken. Is being or has been? Is being. Devo studiare inglese prima o poi. Regarding dubbing, sometimes a restoration can occur after a redubbing has already taken place. And the most common choice is to give a priority to the first, and in any case to include all versions in the edition, as I had the occasion to do with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which I restored a few years ago. This is possible because on Blu-ray and DVD, also on modern streaming systems, you can choose, as a listener, you can choose the version you prefer. Also, touching on the subject of who should contribute to a restoration, it's important to remember that the director is not the sole author of a film, having to include in the list, for example, the musician, the composer, and the screenwriter. But beyond the legislation, we cannot fail to recognize also the impact of crews and many professionals who operate at the intersection of technical and artistic roles. In short, the film is never under the total control of the director, except for Kubrick, without forgetting the role of the producer, who can intervene on a problematic film, even bringing it to deserve an Oscar. Personally, in this regard, I also believe it's right to consider editions in other languages as an extension of the original work, not as a distinct element. Let us remember that sometimes foreign editions are directly supervised by directors. For example, when I did the Italian mix of the Grand Budapest Hotel, Wes Anderson followed the translation very carefully. It is therefore a stimulating but also delicate point of reflection when during restoration the director, other authors on the producer might still be alive, even if very old. In these cases, their interference is not guaranteed to be positive because they can easily be tempted to consider restoration as extra time to be used to modify a work they consider imperfect in some detail. Let us also consider that these people are no longer the same as they once were. They have probably changed their taste and their way of perceiving. Trivially, they might have lost much of their hearing, especially in the high frequencies. Let us also see other aspects that further complicate the question of the original spectator's experience. The enjoyment of a film doesn't stop at the premiere evening at the cinema. Most spectators will see it on television. The viewing experience in different times and places can thus be highly variable, and we must take this into account in our reasoning, because it's estimated that the ratio between those who see a film at the cinema and those who see it on television over the subsequent 20 years is conservatively on the order of 1 to 10, and some estimate it to be as much as 1 to 20. Let us see how Jesus of Nazareth fits into this discussion, summarizing some of its characteristics. As we anticipated, it's a work that makes the certainties of those who oversimplify by talking about respect for the original creak even more, because although designed for television, it was shot on 35mm color film at 24 frames per second. Broadcast just a few months after the introduction of color in Italy, when very few could take advantage of color, and was also readapted for projection in Cinematographer over 2 long evenings the years after. Moreover, it was shot in English, by the Italian edition, as we said before, was directly supervised by the director. The music was recorded and mixed in stereo, but a stereo version of the series has never been presented until today. Okay. Only 10 seconds.
Sembrerebbero dei re sovrani, di terre lontane.
Ti ho detto che non potevamo essere stati i soli a leggere i cieli.
dovunque mi guida la luce di quella stella.
Bene. In the diegetic music, which is where the music is inside a narration, dancers, etc. Frequently, I reduced the stereophony, which is not good here now. You are set out of the center axis, and we haven't here now an Atmos system which improves some of the characteristics. But in such cases, I reduced the music sound to mono or near mono, except for some scene where, for example, this one, or the Salome dance, where it is clear that the music became the protagonist. So it is better to, come si dice, avvolgere il pubblico, come si dice? Envelop. Okay. There is a problem if you have the possibility to put better music on the original mix. You can't follow the exact balance that the original recording mixer should. Why? Because in these choices, this balance was thought for television, for a reduced dynamic, for a reduced extension on the bass, especially on bass frequencies, mono in this case. So we worked on a sort of deluxe version where we wanted to emphasize some effect also in the music. Having the separate stems are the component of a mix. Having the separate stems available, dialogue, music and effects, albeit only in the English version, and having patiently replaced the music with that from the stereo masters, I exploited the possibility of obtaining a more spectacular and enjoyable product. Always, however, considering a balanced mix with the rest of the sound. Letting the sound of the original music be more natural and adherent to the dynamics desired by the composer and conductor Maurice Jarre, which is also the father of the pop star Jean-Michel Jarre. It must, however, be stressed that an operation of this kind cannot be carried out by a normal restoration technician. My experience of over 20 years as a film and television mix engineer and the frequenting of concert halls as a classical music enthusiast proved indispensable. Regarding spatialization, I opted for an up-mixing from stereo to Dolby Atmos, also adding a slight reverberation suitable for orchestral music, involving the side channels, the rear one, and those placed on the ceiling. There were, however, a couple of cases, as I told you before, where the stereo tended to distract, shifting the listener attention away from the center of visual attention. In such cases, I proceeded to narrow and recenter the stereo image. In diegetic or diegetic music, I generally maintain the monophonic sound to avoid it being disconnected from the rest of the sound. An exception I made, for example, for Salome Dance, where it's clear that the music takes over and becomes the protagonist, guiding emotion, somehow linking the spectators in the film with those outside the film. Also, in the case of dialogue and effects, when the acoustic spaces narrated were extremely large, I considered it more realistic and enjoyable to reproduce the original reverb in a multi-channel version, rather than coming from a small point at the center of the screen. For the Italian version, where we didn't have the stem separation, I had to reduce the level of the original mono music sufficiently enough to be able to replace it with the high-quality version. And to do this, I used an artificial intelligence system in the affected part, choosing it among the many available, and sometimes choosing one or the other system depending on the kind of music and on the artifacts that I listen with different systems. These choices perfectly exemplify the philosophy of augmented restoration, recognizing that the original balance was a self-imposed technical limitation, not an artistic choice that would have been implemented in the presence of better technology. Another 5-10 minutes talking about music. It would be interesting to see this slide. Imagine to search hundreds of music fragments in the original reels and to put in the same place in the 6 hours of the movie. It was complex. The simple method I used was to classify music using for each music the soloist, the instruments used, the theme, the musical theme. Here you see some numbers, which is a very simple way to do search using alphabet and numbers. The first number is the first note, which is always 0, and the other one are the difference in semitones, positive or negative. This is a very simple way to archive, to classify the themes. And this is the number of the times this theme has been used inside the series. 38 times. Okay, etc. Etc. If you want, I'll end here. I give you the opportunity to ask some question, and during my answer, you can hear some other music from the original tapes in at a low level, okay, for your comfort. There are some other slides, but this is a fragment of the Pro Tools session. I did an analysis of the material we had at our disposal. I did a comparison of the quality between the various versions to choose the best ones. Choosing the best, finding the best version is not as simple as it seems. There is obviously your ear, but also sometimes it is useful to see some objective numerical values such as frequency response, signal to noise ratio, and also dynamic. Here you can use, for example, the loudness range, or an histogram showing the distribution of levels of loudness to compare a more compressed version, dynamically compressed version, or a more dynamic, etc. Okay? Or you can look at the average spectrum of a fragment to see, for example, some interesting traces of the workflow, and measuring the noise. You have to understand that this is noise instead of percussions, high frequency, or musical instruments. And usually, looking at the spectrogram, you see if there is a correlation between medium frequencies and high frequency. There are, for sure, other techniques out of way.
I'm sure I'll invent something else.
There are already the dynamic number, frequency response, subjective quality of various versions, from an English version on Blu-ray, channel 1, channel 2. This is very funny, because there are English version and also Italian version that aren't mono. They are dual mono with the phase problems. They acquired, digitized the tapes using a stereo machine with the problem in azimuth not calibrated, and they said, "Oh, yes, it's a stereo. There is difference between left and right."
Phasing is pleasant.
Phasing is good. Okay. This is for comparing the background noise of tapes and copies of tapes. We had also digital tapes transcribed from the original analog tape, and I tried to compare with our digitization, just to check that our digitization was better. Okay, questions?
When does it come out? The restored version?
Come
When does it come out? When it's available?
Actually, I think this year.
Okay.
I'm not sure, because it doesn't depend on me, but I think this year. Interesting. Again. This is a mistake in the movie, because they wanted to add a, come si dice, colomba. A DAV. They added 2 seconds of a dove flying in the sky, and perhaps without the composer in the mixing room, they cut. This is one of hundred of situations where you have to reason and to think what to do. Sometimes leaving traces of errors, of bad choice, of time can be historically interesting. Sometimes, for example, the noise of a truck 2000 years ago is not useful for the narration, so I denoised this. But I have hundreds of situations, and imagine the complexities of such a work.
2 and 3 takes 7.
Oh. Just actually
So Paolo Brandoni is a lecturer at PFL in Lausanne. Entrepreneur, many things, musician, piano player, and what else?
I mean, no, I mean, no.
And we're gonna give a talk about the audio for video games in all times, actually.
Right.
Something revisited.
Right. So first of all, I don't know. The reason why I'm here, because this is not really probably what you usually deal with. But the reason why I'm here is because I'm a very old friend of Simone's, and I brought proof. This is, can you recognize Simone in this photo? And well, me is that guy over there, right? So we go back really a long time, and the difference is that he was first interested in music and then in technology, and I probably went the other way around, but we sort of converged, and in the end we talk about audio and music all the time, so I'm very happy to be here and talk about, as you saw from the title, the audio in old video games, and especially the video games from home computers in the 80s. Now, I understand this is a very niche topic, but the reason for this, I mean, a bit like Marco's talk on CRTs, but the reason for the subject is because it's very fascinating how the technologies that were used in very old platforms in the 80s then were really the precursors to audio coding techniques that today are really the most advanced or high quality, talking about SDS and so on. What is interesting is to see how these programmers that were using these very limited machines in the 80s came up on their own with ways of making a lot of interesting sounds with very limited means. So what we're going to do in this talk is go very quickly through what is one-bit music and how it came to be in the early video games. And then we will take these intuitions with some examples and see how they really paved the way for Sigma Delta and other interesting encoding techniques. Now, so my background is mostly signal processing, so perhaps this is a bit, if I get too technical, just stop me and I will stick to the fun parts, but sometimes I get a bit into the details and I just don't want to abuse your patience. So one little remark about this presentation, the slides are actually a Python notebook, so they're just code if you want. And you can download them if you like to play with the little examples that I'm going to show. Everything that you see on the slides is actually coded in the slides, the routines and the charts. The plots are together with the code that produces them. Now, I like to give presentations like this because by writing little self-contained examples, you really learn much better details of what you're talking about. I call this, computational thinking. And if you like to play with Python or just to play with interactive presentation, feel free to download the whole of the notebook. So, one-bit audio. So the term might evoke different images, different people. So most of you probably will think of DSD and other advanced audio coding techniques. But a few people, older people perhaps, that had home computers in the 80s will think back of their little personal computers and the first games that they played on them. And what is interesting is that there is a very long-lived set of artists that are still using the same technology or emulations, if you want, today of those technologies to create electronic music that goes under the name of chiptune. Perhaps you've heard about that. Still very active today, and it's fascinating, and we will see why it is fascinating. But the two topics are actually closely related, and we will see the connection as we go forward in the talk. Why does it go further? So, just to define some of the terms that we'll use later, chiptune is really this kind of music that is still to this day designed to be played or to be actually synthesized by very specific audio chips that are probably no longer in production, but they can be emulated. They have very limited sound capabilities, but a very particular tone. And then when you strip the amount of resources that you have even more, to the point where all you can create are what I would call binary waveforms, so signals that have only two values, just 0 and 1. Then you go to the one-bit music scene, which is particularly fascinating because this music can be produced by very, very small self-contained devices. And a few years ago, this composer came out with this very interesting releases. These are CD cases, but they contain the hardware that plays well, in this case, the symphony or whatever set of pieces composed
for this 1-bit music generators, and so probably you're very curious to hear how these sound. And these are, I mean, it's an acquired taste, but let's see, for next service that would be, well, if it did play, but it doesn't. Okay, so, gli audio sono cambiando?
Sulla interfaccia?
Sono con HDMI?
Volume, grande potenziometro.
Ah, questo?
Sound card?
No, devi mettere questa da sound card.
Ah, la sound card. Wait, we have a sound. All right, let's go back to one. Oh, there you go. Let's say it's an acquired taste, but we'll hear something a bit more pleasant later on. So let's just not abuse your ears too much and move forward to a little history of audio in early video games. So the very first games had no sound at all. Completely silent screens and things moving. But pretty soon they started to add some sound effects. So the milestones are the first game that had sound was called Pong. It came out in 1972, and it was basically, it wasn't even completely digital. You have really handles that you could turn to move those pedals on the two sides of the screen. But when the ball bounced off a wall or a paddle, you heard a beep. And then Space Invaders, probably some of you have seen this, if not in the original, in the emulation, had this continuous in-game sound, one like this. And that was the first. And then Pac-Man came out in 1980. And it was important because really the music was an integral part of the game, and so much so that the composer was actually credited. And in all these cases, whether it was on the big arcade machines that you had in amusement parks or arcade, or if it was consoles or home computers, all the sounds were generated by dedicated audio chips. So in the hardware you had a little chip that was programmable and was dedicated to generating sounds. So chiptune is exactly the kind of music that is produced or composed for these particular chips. There are sort of the very famous in the chiptune scene. It's a more sophisticated 1-bit music because every chip had different characteristics, more or fewer oscillators, perhaps some noise synthesizer to simulate drum sounds. And to this day, if you go to YouTube, you have like the best chip tunes of 2025. And they sound a bit like this, it's much more articulated, but very characteristic. So let's jump somewhere. Sophisticated because these chips had potentially very sophisticated sound capabilities. Now, when we moved to the home computing era, so we started to have little computers that were affordable and people could buy, and they were sold as educational devices. Buy your kid a computer so they will learn to be computer scientists. In reality, people bought it because they wanted to play games on them. And there was really an enormous market of games for home computers. And so these home computers as well had to deal with the problem of generating sounds. So a few milestones, you see the first Apple computer here that came out in 1977. In 1982 you had the Commodore 64 and the ZX Spectrum that we will talk about later. Then the Macintosh in 1984 and then the Amiga. And these were all PCs that had their sound generating chips. Once again, just like in the video games, you were limited in your sound generation by the capabilities of the specific hardware that you could find in these computers. And then what happened? And then you've got Sound Blaster, so Sound Blaster, add-on hardware that you could add to the computer, and these sound cards could do something completely different. They could play digital audio, so they could actually access audio samples in the computer's memory and play them out. And so at that point, you didn't need to have a sound generating chip and learn how to program and coax some sounds out of it. You could just either record some audio and play it out, or synthesize whatever you wanted with whichever algorithms you wanted to implement in your software. And what happened is that as digital audio became mainstream, so you started to have compact discs and so cheaper hardware to convert digital audio to analog signals, sound cards became more and more powerful, and if you want, the last nail in the coffin for audio chips, dedicated audio chips, was the appearance in 1988 of fast PCI sound cards. PCI means that simply they could access the onboard memory very, very fast. At that point, there was no reason anymore to use dedicated sound chips because everything could be done in software. And that was the end of the old way of generating sounds. Now, the versatility of these sound cards is the reason why they're not really interesting to talk about. That's why we want to talk about one-bit music. But we want to know a little bit how, and I apologize if I'm saying something obvious, how these cards work. And the reason why we want to do this is because the notable exception in all the computers that I've showed you before, all had their own specific audio chip, is that this machine, which was a fantastic PC, and Simone and I had one, and spent a lot of time exchanging programs and software. This machine was very, very cheap, but very sophisticated in certain ways. And one of the ways they made it so cheap is that they decided not to include an audio chip, a dedicated sound chip, but they nevertheless included an onboard little speaker. You can see, so this is schematics of a part of the. There was an onboard little speaker, and this speaker was driven directly by the CPU. What that meant was that if you wrote some code, you could toggle a signal on one of the data lines and turn the speaker on and off. That's all you could do. Like 2 levels, right? On and off. And there's not much you can do with that, but fundamentally, if you think about this structure, what you have here is a sound card, in the sense that you are putting out samples to the speaker, digital samples, except that these samples have only 1 bit of resolution. They're either on or off. So this didn't sound chip, had a sound card with a very limited one. So how does it work when you have, when you want to translate samples into a signal that you want to pass on to a loudspeaker? Very briefly, you need to have what is called a digital to analog converter. You have a series of numbers that are encoded over a certain number of bits per sample. So like in digital audio, a CD would have 16 bits per sample. Early sound cards perhaps had 8. So these samples have to be converted into a continuous time voltage, and this is done with the help of that little circuit there, which is usually much bigger. The more bits per sample you have, the larger the dynamic range of your analog signal. And the rule of thumb is that you have about 6 dBs per extra bit you add to the resolution. The problem is that this is, for instance, an analog to digital to analog converter for a system with 3 bits per sample, which is not very much. The crux of the matter here are these resistors that have to be very, very precise in order to have a good DA converter. And so the more bits per sample you have, the more expensive your D2A converter. The idea is, and it's still the case today, if you take your phone, you're speaking to your phone, your voice is converted into a digital signal. The converter will do it for economic reasons at 1 bit per sample. It will never use originally 8 or 16 bits per sample, even if in the end the equivalent dynamic range will be the same as a 16-bit per sample signal. So there's an economic reason to try and want to reduce the resolution of each sample. Now, once you have a digital waveform and you want to play it out, and if you want to play music, and I'm saying something very obvious here, you want to control the melody, how the melody sounds, how loud it is. So the 3 fundamental parameters that you want to control are the pitch, the timbre, and the loudness of a waveform. And a pitch, a musical pitch, is determined by the presence in the audio signal of a repeating pattern. And the number of times per second this pattern repeats determines the pitch that you hear. The shape of the pattern doesn't really matter in terms of pitch, but it will affect the quality of the sound, like the timbre and the loudness. So here's the first little demo. Let's take a look at one. And can you tell me if I'm going to so here, this is then where you have a little shape. This is one period, one pattern. This is the same pattern, now plotted as a continuous line instead of having all the dots, because otherwise it would be too busy to look at. And so you repeat this pattern as long as you want, and then you play it out over the loudspeaker. So if you have a pattern like this is like a sinusoid, you know, when you put them all together, of course it sounds like a sinusoid. And I should be able to play this, yes. And I can try and change the frequency if I want by simply repeating this pattern. So by making this pattern short, you see the number of samples here in the basic pattern reduces, so that means that there will be more patterns per second, and the perceived pitch will be higher, right? But what is interesting, oops, sorry, maybe I should lower a bit the volume, I don't know how to do it. Oh, maybe I'll be here. But what's interesting, as I said before, is that you can put whatever you want in this pattern. So we started with sinusoid, but you know, we could change it to a sawtooth, you know, that looks like this when it's repeated, and you will see that the pitch doesn't change, but the quality of the sound does. So it sounds a bit more like a trumpet, you know? Then you could change the shape to a square, right? And so it would look like this, a square wave. And this also will have the same pitch, but it will sound different and probably even a different loudness. What is probably counterintuitive is that you can put in this pattern really whatever you want. You can put random numbers, okay? And so it will look like this. And the pitch will stay the same. Really, it doesn't really matter what's in the pattern. And I can regenerate this, right? And so it's a different shape. So the timbre will change a bit, but the pitch remains the same. So it's the repetition rate, right? So it's very simple, but it will be useful to remember this later. Okay, so what happens when we have only binary waveforms? What happens when all we can do is put out here either a high level or a low level? Well, so basically just going up and down. Well, remember what I said before, the dynamic range, so the ratio, if you want, between the softest sound you can make and the loudest sound you can make depends on how many bits you're going to use to encode the samples that you put out to the loudspeaker. But in binary waveforms, you have only one bit. So the ratio between the loudest and the softest is 1, because there's only one sound you can make. And so the dynamic range of a 1-bit signal is 0 dB. You have really no dynamic range. The saving grace, otherwise you wouldn't be able to do much, but the saving grace is that at least even in the little spectrum there, you had a speed of production of the samples, and it was what we call the sampling rate or the interpolational rate for these 1-bit samples. It was quite high. It was about 200 kilohertz, right? So you could, and that's the whole trick. You know, you compensate for a lack of resolution by being very fast. So
increasing sampling frequency is equivalent to increase the number of bits.
It's not equivalent in a very straightforward way, but yes, in the end, that's what it is. You can trade, I mean, the way to think about it is this. Imagine to have a digital signal where every sample is 8 bits. Now, this 8 bits stack them vertically. Now you turn this, and it's 1 bit at a time, but it will take 8 times the number of samples. So that's the rule of thumb. But when I was 14, I didn't know these things, and I thought that the only thing you could do with a 1-bit signal was to create square waves. And the spectrum gave you a very nice command called beep, and you would tell the time of how long the note would be and how many semitones above middle C or below middle C you wanted to play, and you could create little tunes. And so, for instance, if you wanted to play Pac-Man, you could do it, and that's, you remember this? Right, and so this is just like standard monophonic pitches that you can do by putting these ones and these zeros over the loudspeaker. Now, okay, where's that? Oh, sorry. What you're creating here are so-called binary square waves. So you're creating, remember the example before, you could put any pattern to create a pitched sound. Well, here too you can put any pattern, but your patterns can only be zeros and ones. And so there are only two things that you can change. How long your pattern is, which we call the period of the wave, and determines also the pitch you hear. And the other variable you have at your disposal is the duty cycle. So how many of these samples in this pattern are going to be 1 and how many are going to be 0. And that's all you can do if you want to create a standard pitched sound. And yeah, you can change the frequency like before, but that will not change the fact that it's binary. So you can make it higher, lower, and you can change the duty cycle. And when you do that, so you reduce the number of ones and zeros, you change slightly the quality of the sound. So if you have a balanced period, that would be like this, it sounds like this. And then if you reduce the duty cycle, you get thinner and thinner sounding notes. And in the limit, you get a single non-zero sample, and you get something very, very soft, because the perceived loudness is, of course, dependent on the power of the signal, and the power depends on the number of samples that are equal to 1. Because if it's all 0, it would be 0 power. So that's the only little thing you can change in a binary square wave. But there's a much bigger problem just not having sophisticated sounds. And just like if you wanted to do Space Invaders, once you start to become a bit more proficient with programming, instead of using the standard beep commands, you started to play with the period, the frequency, and you could have these sweeps, and you can make things like, okay, the space has been invaded, evacuation. This is still binary square waves, nothing. Or the laser beams by having revealed. But these are all very, very basic sounds. The real problem is that if you really played Pac-Man in an arcade, you would immediately notice that Pac-Man was not a single voice. It was a two-part invention of sorts. It had a bass. So that's what you want to hear. But what is the problem here? Well, I know the notes of Pac-Man. I know how to synthesize the melody with 1-bit levels. And so in theory I could say, I synthesize the treble and the bass, and then I sum them together and I have my polyphonic sound. But of course the problem is that when you sum two binary waveforms, the result is no longer a binary waveform. You sum treble and the bass, and you have 3 possible values for your output. At that point you cannot play this on the loudspeaker anymore, because the loudspeaker in the spectrum has only 2 states. So how do you go about this? I didn't think it was possible to make polyphonic audio with 1 bit. And then I think it was Simone that actually came to my house with this game called Manic Miner. And this is a fantastic game, by the way. If you never used a Spectrum, get yourself a simulator on the internet and play this game, because it's going to be one of the best times you're going to have. Well, anyway, this guy, this Manic Miner, which was programmed by a 15-year-old kid in England at the time, it was 1984, I think, yeah, started with an intro theme that sounded like this. This is really a video from YouTube that films the Spectrum. Sounds great, but I was like, well, how do you do that? It's a bit out of tune, but it's still better than just a monophonic signal. Okay, so that was already pretty shocking. And then Simone came with another game I think the following year, called Vectrum. And this was really mind-blowing, because this had a lot. This had, first of all, it was cool, and then dynamics. This was really kind of, just had no idea how to do this. So, let's see how we do that, if you're interested. This is pretty cool. So, how do we go about creating polyphonic signals that can be played on a 1-bit device? One of the things that was really fascinating as I was preparing this little talk, out of curiosity, I went on the internet and I found a website where they had the complete machine code disassembly of that Manic Miner game. I mean, it's fantastic what you find on the net these days. And so I looked at the listing, and I remembered a bit how to program in machine code, and so I translated exactly verbatim this code into Python so that I could reproduce the exact intro sound from Manic Miner. And this is the code. These are actually the values of the notes that are in the disassembly of the program. And it sounds exactly like the original. I get this blue Danube, with all the distortion and everything. Okay, so what we have here is that we know that we can reproduce this, because I know for sure that this code generates only zeros and ones, and when I play it on my computer, it sounds like Manic Miner. So let's take it apart and see how that works. Or better, let's try and get there independently rather than doing reverse engineering. So let's think about how we can do polyphony on using binary signals. Again, remember, one of the key ingredients is that we have a high sampling rate. If we didn't have that, we wouldn't be able to. And this kind of chips, are the ones that would be used today to create one bit waveform. So the first idea is, you remember, as I showed you before, you can change the duty cycle of a square wave. The pitch doesn't change, the color of the sound changes, but if you make the duty cycle very, very small and the limit to just one sample per period, when you sum two of these waveforms, let's call them pulse trains, well, the chances that two one samples are really one over the other are very slim, very small. And so you shouldn't have many samples that are not two-level. So let's see with Pacman. So this would be the treble synthesized as a pulse train, so square waves with a duty cycle of one sample. This is the base. And then when you sum them together, you see that, the pulses are rarely overlapping. Actually, I compute the percentage of collision over the entirety of the piece, and it's like 24 samples that are overlapping out of 200,000, right? So let's compare the sum of these two versus a sum where the 24 collisions have been removed, and there's of course no difference. And it sounds like this. I'm going to just play the clip sum because it makes sense. Okay, so this is a two-voice Pacman theme that uses only two possible values for the samples. What is the problem with this rendition of the theme? Is that it sounds very thin, very weak. And the reason is, as I said before, the shorter the duty cycle, the weaker the sound. And you don't want to hear this mosquito singing Pacman. You want something with a bit of bass, right? And so you want to increase the duty cycle. And if you try to do that, pretty soon you will see that you can make it a little bit bigger, and the bigger you make it, the more collisions you have. And once you start to have over 5% of samples that are colliding, things don't sound good anymore. And if you try to clip them, it sounds like this. It's louder, but lots of artifacts, right? So this is not really the way to do it. The way to do it is perhaps counterintuitive, but very, very efficient. And it works like this. You interleave or you multiplex your signals. So suppose I want to mix these two signals, like the orange and the green. And what I do is I take one sample from the first sequence and then one sample from the second sequence, and so on and so forth. So I alternate my choice between the two sequences so that I have a sequence that looks like this. Now I use colors to make you understand what I saved and how I shuffle them together. Now with waveforms that are not binary, it's kind of easy to see how the two signals are now multiplexed. Much harder to see it when you use binary sequences. So if I try to mix these two, interleave or multiplex these two signals, I get something like this, which doesn't seem to have a repeating pattern. It seems to be a bit random. But But it works because if you do that with a background, so the code to synthesize a two-voice binary signal with full duty cycle is very simple like that. And when you play it, it sounds like this. And this is really 1 bit per sample. And if you compare this to the original that has 3 levels, so it's no longer a binary waveform, it sounds exactly the same. And there's no tricks. So, how does this work? And let me get the phone because I don't want to run out of time. It works like so. It's, imagine what I'm doing here is, remember, I'm multiplexing these 2 waveforms, the green and the gray. So that means that I'm taking one sample from this, and then the next sample from this, and then the next sample from this, and so on and so forth. So when the first waveform and the second waveform have the same value, say 0 and 0, well, I will have 0. And when they have 1 and 1, I will have 1. But when the first is, say, 0, and the second one is 1, by alternating samples from the 2 waveforms, I will have a portion of my result where the samples alternate at each sample between 0 and 1. So I go from a flat signal to a signal that alternates at the fastest frequency. Now, the trick is this. If you take that sequence, this interleaved sequence, and put it through a low-pass filter, you get this brown signal here. And underneath, you see the 3-level signal that is obtained by a standard mix. And that's exactly what we're hearing here. We're hearing the brown curve. We're hearing a low-pass version of a binary signal that alternates very fast when it has to reach this intermediate level. Now, after the fact, it's kind of intuitive what's happening here. A low-pass filter is basically a machine that computes kind of the average value, smooths out fast-moving things. And so when you have something that moves very fast between 0 and 1, so fast, in fact, that it changes from 0 to 1 at every sample, the average of this fast oscillation is 1/2. It's the mysterious third value that we couldn't achieve with a binary waveform. This system of encoding audio is called pulse density modulation, where we use binary waveforms, we replace intermediate values by appropriate oscillations at the right speed between 0 and 1. Now, is it general? Can we apply to other things? To understand why we can do this, it's probably it's useful to consider, again, this idea of duty cycle. If you take a waveform, a square wave with period 4 samples, you have, of course, 3 possible duty cycles, 1 sample, 2 samples, and 3 samples. And when you average this waveform, the average value per period will depend on duty cycle. It will be actually equal to the duty cycle. And so, if you need to have 10 intermediate values, you need to encode these values with square waves with period 10 and 9 possible different duty cycles. When you pass them through the low-pass filter, you see a duty cycle of 2/4, which is 1/2. The output of the filter will converge to 1/2. And a duty cycle of 3/4 will converge to 3/4, and so on and so forth. But now you're going to say, well, where is the low-pass filter? And you can show us the low-pass filter. Well, the low-pass filter is the loudspeaker. The loudspeaker will have a response that rolls off very fast after 20 kilohertz, probably even much earlier in the old spectrum. And even if it doesn't, usually you have capacitors that are put somewhere near the loudspeaker, in the circuit that drives the loudspeaker to avoid overloading the coil. And that in and of itself, with the resistance of the coil, creates a low-pass filter, or the inertia of the cone. Anyway, you have a low-pass filter in your ears as well. And as long as those oscillations that we saw before are fast enough to be beyond the threshold, the hearing range, or at least beyond the cutoff frequency of the low-pass filter, you will not hear it. We'll just hear the average value. And so, if you look at the spectrum, for instance, that's exactly what happens. If I synthesize Pac-Man as the sum of two square waves, two binary signals, I get this orange spectrum that you see in the back, right? And it's a spectrum that, as you can see, has all this frequency content here in the low frequency area, as it's supposed to be. But as you move up in frequency, it basically has nothing. If I plot the spectrum of the pulse density modulated signal, the binary version, you can see that you have something that is very similar to the original content there. But you have all this extra high frequency content, which is due to those fast alternations, but that is at 24 kilohertz, you're not going to hear it, and it's going to be filtered out by the speaker. Can we do even better? So what if we have more than two signals? Same. The number of signals will determine the minimum period for these alternating square waves that encode the intermediate signals, and that is the limit on how many voices you can mix together. So let me give you an example. Let's start with very aria from the Magdalena. What's the Bach place?
This is from
the Magdalena. Yeah, but I forget her first name. Anna. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, so this is a four-part piece, and so we can either synthesize each voice independently as a binary waveform and sum it together. So you'll have the average of four binary waveforms will give you a waveform with four possible values, so no longer a binary waveform, or we can synthesize it by these multiplexing techniques. And that's what we get. So if we sum them, we get this orange line, right? If you use multiplexing, we get this blue line, and you see that sometimes the alternation is very fast, like here, sometimes less fast, and that's how you encode the intermediate levels. And if I play it, let's start with the original, so the sum of the individual voices. Very nice 3 cycles with good bass. And then, so this is a waveform that has 5 different levels in the output, and this is a waveform that has only 2 levels in the output. And I don't hear it. So I'm playing the blue line then. So, and all this we can do because we have a high sampling rate. Remember, this is the crucial ingredient. If we didn't, like for instance, if we couldn't oversample, if we couldn't use a high sampling rate, if we tried to do exactly the same synthesis, which was done I think at 96 kilohertz as a sampling rate, if I tried to do that at 24 kilohertz, it would sound like this. Because now the problem is that you are still getting those intermediate levels, but the alternations are too slow, and so the spurious frequencies are not filtered out by the speaker, and they're fully within the hearing range of a normal listener. So, yeah. All right. So this is kind of fun, and I don't want to. Yeah. So let's wrap up the Manic Miner story because that's really where we started. And what is funny is that as I was studying the code, I said, there's a bug here. You know, the guy could have implemented this the right way, but he didn't. And let me show you why. Because if I take exactly the pitches and durations there are in the original code of Manic Miner, well, it sounds like this. And it's what we heard before in the YouTube video. Okay, so this is what the game gives you. But if I take the same score and I synthesize it by multiplexing, like I showed you before, that's how it sounds. pitch, it's clean. So, why? And I thought, okay, I guess that the guy didn't really think too much about it, and I can fault him, it was like 15. But what he did fundamentally, by looking at the code, was doing the average of the two voices and then clipping it. Everything that was above 1 was brought down to 1. And the proof of that is that if you take the two voices that make up this melody and you sum them together, you get the clean sound, as if you were multiplexing. But now if you take this same signal and you clip it to 2 levels, you get this. It's just a detuning due to the fact that you are clipping the waveform. And so yeah, I would like to write to the guy and say, yes, but it's too late for a bug bounty, I guess, after 40 years or more. So yeah. And let me just finish. What time is it? What is interesting, and I didn't think about it at first, is that this multiplexing, taking samples from, say you want to mix a bunch of digital signals, and no longer binary. But this multiplexing works also for standard audio signal. You just take one sample from the first audio file and one sample for the second one, and you alternate them. Then you low pass filter explicitly if you are, if your sampling frequency is not it's not high enough. And what you get is the mix of the two. So I found on the internet some stems, as Simone was saying, the isolated tracks from some Beatles records. And so one song that I like a lot is like Revolution, right? So you get the vocals. You say you want a revolution, well, you know. And then you have the backing track. We all want to change the world. Okay, the backing track by itself. So if you put them together, just sum and divide by 2, you get the standard mix. So that's easy to do, but surprisingly, at least for me, is the fact that you can do it with multiplexing. So now I'm taking just one sample from each track alternately, and it sounds like this. So it's a perfect mix just by interleaving the sequences. And there's a beautiful mathematical explanation for that, which takes about 4 slides of 4 minutes, and I decided to skip that, but for those that want to see it, it's available in the version you can download. So, in the interest of time, why is this all relevant today? As I said before, the reason is speed is cheap, resolution is expensive. So whenever you have an audio format that requires a high dynamic range, the normal or the intuitive approach would be to say, I'm going to use more bits to quantize it. I'm going to encode it over a larger number of bits per sample. The problem is that both the analog digital converter, the sampler, and the digital to analog converter will be very, very expensive. On the other hand, going fast, sampling fast, processing fast, as Marco was saying, today is not a problem. You can have samplers and interpolators in the gigahertz range. So, if we can really trade precision, resolution for speed, we want to do it. And as I said, your cell phone does it. Any kind of consumer device will have a digital to analog converter or an analog digital converter that is 1 per sample. This is fundamental for economic reasons. The way we do it, though, is a bit more complicated than what I've seen before, and I'm not going to go into the details. But the reason why we need something a bit more complicated is that, because as you remember before, is that if I have, say, n intermediate levels that I have to try and approximate with fast oscillations, then I need to use square waves whose period is equal to the number of the intermediate levels, or in other words, I have to oversample my signal by the number of possible intermediate levels. Now, if you think about, say, CD audio quality that uses 16 bits per sample, well, that means that you have 2 to the power of the 16th, so 65,536 possible levels in your waveform. And if you use the standard approach that we used before for Bachmann, you'd have to sample your signal at 1.3 gigahertz, which is a bit too much even for today's standards. And so the way to overcome this problem is to introduce feedback in the system. So everything we've seen so far was just feed forward. We look at the input and we just processed it into a 1-bit sequence. But in modern converters called Sigma Delta, you have a system like this where you put out either zeros or ones, so you have a 1-bit output, but this output is fed back, and what the system does is track the difference, because you're going to be recovering this with a low-pass filter anyway, so it tracks it back, it puts it through a low-pass filter, and computes the difference between what the reconstruction would be like at that point given the previous sequence of zeros and one, and which value you have to output next to make sure that the reconstruction approaches the original. So it's a sort of like a self-correcting mechanism that varies the density of ones, let's put it this way, according to the difference between the local estimate and the next input sample. This is called the Sigma Delta converter. It's a very fascinating device, but what is even more fascinating is that, well, it takes, this is the code to implement the Sigma Delta converter. And I'm making it long because I do explicit if and else. It's literally 2 lines of code, and if you, for instance, use this system to encode a sinusoid like this, the output will be this blue curve, where you see that the density of one samples changes dynamically to make sure that when you average locally this blue waveform, you obtain this brown curve that is a perfect sinusoid. And you can use it, of course, for any kind of audio. So just to finish with another example that also courtesy of Simone, is his favorite, he introduced me to Wendy Carlos. So let's take a little piece of just like a few seconds Brandenburg Concerto. Now this is, I had to downsample it to and band limit it to 4 kilohertz maximum frequency, because the sound card of this machine is not fast enough to go to the required sample rate. But the original sounds like this. This is 16 bits per sample. And if I want to transform this signal into a 1-bit per sample signal, well, I could do like the Manic Miner guy did, just use clipping. So this is 1 bit per sample with clipping, and I don't think you're gonna like it. Hey, it's fascinating. You can still tell. You can still recognize music, and you've thrown away what 15/16th of information, but still, we're very good with our ears. But if you put this through a Sigma Delta converter, you still have 1 bit per sample. I don't know where my cursor is. I'm getting blind. You put it through a Sigma Delta converter, and still 1 bit per sample, just like the clipped version, but now it sounds like this. And that's one little piece of it. And you can see how the density changes very continuously to track the input. And this has about the same signal-to-noise ratio as a 12 bit per sample encoding. So this actually, I think it's pretty much everything I wanted to say. Just to finish, the Sigma Delta, for instance, is the standard encoding technique for DSD, which is a 1 bit per sample, high quality audio standard. I think that is trademarked by Sony. And the same technique used in Super Audio CD. Now, just to give you an example, the standard resolution for the Super Audio CD is uses 64-time oversampling with respect to the sampling rate of a compact disc. So we're talking about 2.8 megahertz, so 2.8 million 1-bit samples per second. So the data rate is on the order of 5.6 megabits per second, but the dynamic range is 120 dBs, which is way higher than a compact disc. So sorry if this was a bit technical, but I think it's very kind of cute, you know, the kind of ingenuity of early game designers, and of course, this has quite an important relevance to any audio activities. Any questions? Yes.
I have one of those chips at home. Of the chips which were used to generate sounds.
Oh yeah, which one?
General Instruments, GY1 something. Last time I used it was 40 years ago.
It was the one in the Amiga?
No.
Okay.
No.
It's fun.
If you want, it's yours.
I would like time for the, but yes, I know, right? There's too many. Yeah, but that was fun. Preparing this, just like, you know, it was a good excuse to spend way too much time on things that I shouldn't spend time on. But I find this extremely fascinating. Just like with the CRT, you know, there's so much we can learn from past techniques, because, you know, the fundamentals there, and once you understand this, then everything is clear. So.
Adding dithering is another way to obtain a polyphonic sound with 1 bit.
Well, dithering, but in a sense, that is dithering, because you're adding this sort of like fast varying samples alternating between one.
Random.
So, in sigma delta, because of the feedback loop, it's almost as if it was random, because, you know, every bit you encode depends on what's happened so far. So it's never deterministic. You know, any encoding, you start 1 millisecond later, you would have a different sequence of zeros and one. So and that's what's making the analysis of sigma delta converters very, very complicated. There are people. I mean, there's a debate in the audio community about the. Some people say it's a crime to use sigma delta converters because they are provably in overload all the time, and so I forget who was this very influential article in the American Acoustic Society, AES. Oh. Yeah, but the guy said if the industry does that, it's a disaster, and I was I don't believe that, but you can add also dither to the loop, but it's not really. Doesn't make a big difference, because anyway the whole system is self-correcting. Dither is useful mostly when you have just feed forward. You know the origin of dither?
Yeah. From an audiophile point of view, DSD is the best digital support, but from a commercial point of view, it didn't take success because. I don't know.
Well, I think the main reason why this is not really the standard is because you cannot do any processing on 1-bit streams. You have to go back to BCM.
Probably it's too simple.
No, you can't filter them, right? So you have to go back to 16 bits because and then re-encode.
It sounds very similar to analog support.
Yes. So
because it's analog in fundamental.
In the end, if you go out to the terahertz, you know, you would just like tracking the photons right now. And so yes, in the end, that's the idea. Thank you.
So, grazie. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Then I'll give you the link if you want to share it.
Thank you everybody for coming, and I hope to see you again around.